There's a bunch of like random things to talk about this week.
There's so many random things. Yeah. So we mentioned an interview that Walker did.
Mhm.
I only saw like mostly fluff questions. Everything else that's coming out from that seems to be coming out in in what do you call it, in articles.
Mhm.
Like not the clips of him saying it, but like the cutesy clip that definitely got passed around was the one of him talking about how he's trying to be a regular teenager and get a job outside of like working on this stuff and he can't.
Yeah, that was like a cute thing that he tried to get a job and they didn't hire him
Yeah.
in his hometown. That I thought I had like the weirdest like I don't know what to call it, like intergenerational trauma with child actors moment when I watched that clip. I was like, I'm having like an out of body experience, like watching this because I've never seen this happen in real time when it's not me
Yeah.
before. Just to like give like background for that interview clip, it was like somebody. So basically, Walker won this award by the Savannah School of Arts and Design in Georgia. And Georgia is a state in the U.S. if you're not from here, where a lot of TV shows and movies and productions do like film them in that state for some reason. I don't know why. It just like 10 years ago, all of a sudden everyone started filming there. And so that college basically had a festival where they were giving awards away. He won the Best Rising Star Award. And so he did a Q&A afterwards with that one guy whose name I can never remember that he's interviewed with a bunch of times. That's like a well-known person. And and some of the clips from people just like in the audience who like went go to the school was out there. And the thing that made me have an out of body, like I was like, this is like a child actor intergenerational trauma moment I'm watching in front of me, and I don't know, I don't know how to respond. Was I watched the year anniversary of Quiet on Set is coming up soon. I did not watch that because that is not a safe thing for me to watch. My God, no, absolutely not. Like the clips of Drake Bell that I saw like on TikTok was already like pushing it, like for me, and that was it was just his part that I saw. Um, but I did watch another documentary that came out about child actors last year called Child Star that was on Hulu that Demi Lovato did, where she interviewed some people from like her generations and also past like child stars too. And so in that in that documentary, they interviewed Christina Ricci, who was a child star when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Like she was older than me. I remember growing up that I loved Caps. Casper was one of the movies that I memorized the entire movie of
Yeah.
Casper. And that came out in like 1995 when I was 10, and she was like 15 by then. And so it was like 1991, like 1990, when she was like a younger kid and was just like becoming a famous actor. I forget. There was something else besides the Adams Family that was her first role, but whatever it was, she was pretty. She was young, and she talked about on this documentary that when she went back to school after filming, the kids at her school that were her friends were like, "Don't talk about that." Basically, like they got upset with her for bringing up what was happening, like this other thing that she was doing.
Yeah.
And so she just like learned not to talk about it around them, and that makes like the two worlds feel like very separate basically. And she just talked about how weird that was, that she could like never talk about like the acting side of her life, and so it made her feel like, is that even real? Because for all these months I'm just like at school being like a normal kid and I can't talk about it with anyone that I see every day. And then Demi Lovato and Allison Stoner also talked about the same sort of thing, that they were bullied a lot in school and ended up kind of dropping out because they went on like tours and stuff. But even before that, they were thinking about not going to school anymore because people at the school were just bullying them a lot for being like on the Disney Channel
Yeah.
when they were like in high school. So then like I'm watching that interview clip of Walker's where they're asking him like, "Oh, what do you do? Like what do you do at home? Like you have friends at school. Do you just like go home and then talk about meeting all these celebrities and stuff?" And he literally verbatim said, "We don't talk about it." And I was like, why does this keep happening to every single generation of child actors? None of them can talk about the things that they're doing with the people that they're with when they're at home. That must be the weirdest experience in the entire world. And
Yeah.
I just have to bring that up because One thing that grates on my entire being as a person is that whenever these like documentary things happen, like quiet on set or what have you, they're always like a big deal for like 2 weeks. And then everyone just like moves on. And so like I did a video the other day, like yesterday, and I just asked like, are child actors any safer? It's been almost a year since this documentary came out. And people in the comments admitted like no. And I'm like, yeah, that's my point. Is that this documentary came out a year ago and literally nothing has changed. And I don't know what to do about that. But I just like almost just want to make a point about that. That like people get really up in arms and upset when there's like a documentary in front of their face, but they also treat it like drama. And that as soon as they like can forget about it, they just like move on and stop thinking about it. And I'm just like, I don't know what could ever like happen to make Hollywood stuff change, but at some point it's gonna have to, right?
Yeah,
Like
I would hope
with how
so.
many kids talk about being hurt and things like that. And it's just like even with this kid that I think is on a show that handles them better than most, he still is just like can't talk about this entire part of his identity with
Yeah.
the people that he sees at home. And it's just like that must feel so weird. So weird.
Yeah, I have Sky in my comments, and she's saying she knows an Olympic swimmer who's medaled, and it's the same thing. Like, yeah, and having these two separate identities, I mean, like, makes me think of almost Hannah Montana, like, because that feels like it was what they were trying to capture. But all of us thought it was like this funny, cute, like, oh, she gets to go to school and be normal and stuff. The thing is, like, even if, because I know Walker made a joke when he talked about, like, I wasn't able to get a job, I'm listing, yeah, Hannah Montana had anonymity. That's this guy saying, and that's where she had it better. With Walker, with him applying for this job and like making a joke, oh yeah, I said Netflix and Disney are my past employers and stuff. It's not that he doesn't have the skills, and or not that they wouldn't hire him just like because he's Walker, but it's because I'm sure at the moment he gets hired somewhere in his hometown, the kids are gonna come like crawling. They're gonna try to find their way to have Walker help them at an ice cream shop or a sandwich shop or a grocery store.
Yeah, like I thought of that with like the people that don't understand boundaries. And I was like, if they knew where they could find him, they would show up there every day and just like mildly somewhat harass him there. And I'm like, when he said that, I was like, I want you to have a normal job like every kid does, but I'm not sure that that would even be safe for you at this point.
Yeah,
Um,
probably not.
Next. But it's just, yeah, it's just I know this happens and it's like, I understand why that happens, like psychologically with kids, that when you see somebody living a very different life than you don't know how to like process it or like respond to it. And so you just don't. But it is like very interesting just to hear him talk about it a little bit. Like the thing that like stood out to me was that Walker is like such a Capricorn where like he works super hard to do Percy stuff. Like he only
Yeah.
had 10 days off the entirety of season 1 and they filmed for 10 months. And but he also is just somebody that is always talking about how he like will read the scene of the book before they film like the scene and just like does an overabundance of like work to get ready for stuff like that. And so to have him do like in that clip, they were saying like, "What do you do when you're at home?" And he's like, "I don't do anything." And he's like, "I just sleep a lot." And I was just like, "What?" This
Yeah.
like, incredibly hardworking child that when he was 11 years old during COVID sent out 8 to 9 like tryouts a week before he got an acting role is just sitting in his room not doing anything. Like
Okay.
that is, I when I heard that I was just like, wow, that is so different than, and that must, it reminds me honestly of me like in the way of my like life at home and then who I was around everyone else was extraordinarily different. And there's always these things going on that I never told anybody about. And it just makes you feel like neither version of you is real. And so you're just like, who am I? I have absolutely no idea. And so when I heard that, I was just like, I see now why child actors have such a hard time. Even if they have like a very nice experience in Hollywood when they're kids, that would be very hard to try to figure that out when you're a child. Like I was a child when I was figuring it out, granted, but I wasn't doing it in front of the entire world.
Yeah.
Like nobody saw me when I was going through that. I was just trying to figure that out on my own. I had privacy and things like that that child actors don't have. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with this cast as they get older and things like that, to see how they react or respond to similar things and problems that child actors have. Hopefully, some of that stuff they don't have to deal with in the same way. I hope not, but it's also a thing of Hollywood is Hollywood, and
Yeah.
so I have no like goodwill towards them ever. And so it'll be interesting to see like what happens. I guess how this show handles it, if we would even know about it, if anything does happen in a negative light. Because I know we've talked about this before, but they do need to be like teenagers sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, hopefully there's like some sort of middle ground where he can find a silly little job, maybe like editing videos at home or something.
Yeah, just
Yes.
something fun. Like he likes playing video games. Can people play video games with him and let him be anonymous and not have to say who he is? That would be nice, or something like that, so that he doesn't have to worry about people finding out who he is. That's why this sort of thing is why when people were sharing videos of him that someone in his actual life clearly like edited to make him look bad, I was mad because I was like, yeah, that is like literal like bullying. And child actors deal with this sort of shit. I've heard so many stories about it. Can we not, as a fandom, take part in furthering that idea when it's clearly something where somebody is sharing stuff that he trusted at one point that is now sharing things he would not want them to share, in that sort of a way, to make just to try to make him look like a jerk. And I was like, I know what bullying looks like. That was my entire childhood. I never had any friends either. And so I was like, can we not do that, please? But
Yeah. I just have to wonder though, like, because on the flip side of it with Walker, he is a like a very beloved. I don't know how to put this without like saying he's attractive. Like
yeah,
he's attractive to girls. You know, you go onto his page, you click the like the what do you call it? The things he's tagged in. It's all edits. And we've talked about this before. If you are a teenager making edits of another teenager, that is age appropriate. That's fine. But I also have to wonder like if that makes it hard to be normal because it's not like just your random kid at school is going to have people editing together like clips of them walking around their job.
yeah, and it's also like the parasocial thing that none of those people actually know him, and so it's like, do they even like him? Like, no, because they have no idea who he is. They like what he looks like, but also a lot of those photos and stuff get photoshopped. And so it's like it's a weird thing that they would Photoshop a literal child, but they do. That was also part of that child star documentary, was them seeing photos that of them where they saw that they had like edited things out, and they were like, "Why are you editing things out of me when I'm like 13?"
Yeah.
So it is like something that they're somewhat aware of, and so it is like a weird thing where all of these people are saying those things about him, but none of them actually know him. And so it's just like, do they don't actually know anything about him, so it must be very weird to see that sort of stuff happening, and just be like, I'm me. I'm
Yeah.
just a person. I'm not anybody like that special. He's just good at acting and cares a lot about it, but that doesn't make him an inherently better person than anybody else.
Mhm.
And along with the other kids too, it must be very weird to have the thing that I like take solace in with all the other kids is that they all live in the LA area, and most of them have friends that are in the industry.
Yeah, so at least they have people their age group that they can talk about these things with.
Yeah, and they don't feel as weird. He, doesn't. So he's the one that I more think about with stuff like this. But at least for the rest of them, they have that friends and stuff and around them that do acting and things like that, and so it's not quite as like severe as probably as going back to like their normal life, because they can still talk about it with people who understand what they're even saying. When most people have never lived this sort of experience before and wouldn't even know what they were even talking about unless they were somebody who is obsessed with like behind the scenes stuff with TV shows and knows what some of these words mean or what that is even like. So that was interesting. But other than that, the interview stuff with him is always interesting because he is such a huge Percy Jackson fan. And so whenever he says he likes something, I always am like, okay, I'm going to take this more seriously because you're one of us. And in the way that he literally in interviews will be like tell fans straight to the camera to come up to him and talk to him about Percy Jackson because he just wants to talk about it with somebody. And so the one thing of all of that that I thought that I just saw like an hour ago was one of those articles that came out by someone. I don't even remember who it is anymore, but they were talking. He was talking about. They're asking him what his favorite episode was, and he said episode 4, which is Scylla and Charybdis, and he mentioned that a couple of times in a couple other interviews that I did see that were like shorter ones.
Yeah.
In this one, he said that he liked it the most because he said it's like a movie. It feels like an entire movie, and that was the first episode where they didn't give them the scripts beforehand and they had them all read it for the first time during their table read because they wanted them all to experience what it would be like together at the same time. And I was just like, oh. And like I know that literally last week I was like, I hate the Odyssey because it reminds me of Epic the musical. But then I read that and I was like, can I like get excited about like the Odyssey being adapted by people who actually love the Odyssey?
Yeah.
Because this sounds pretty great. Because I will say, Daphne Olive is one of the main screenwriters or writers in the writers' room for Percy Jackson, and she actually has a very interesting like story. She was one of us about Black Sails. She did a fan podcast about Black Sails. And the showrunners that are now the showrunners for Percy Jackson heard her podcast and were like, "You're really good at this. Will you join the writers' room of our show?"
Oh wow.
Like literally, that they were just like, "Can you be one of our writers?" And she was like, "Okay." and and now she basically writes on all the shows that they do, including Percy Jackson. She was one of the. They give her a lot of credit for how they adapted Medusa, and so obviously I like her, but she was been posting on her social media lately about how she's a huge Odyssey fan, and like somebody gave her a blanket that looked like Polyphemus's eye for like Christmas, and she was talking about how she can't wait to like nerd out about the Odyssey. And I was just like, this is going to be like, I don't know how to describe that feeling of like mythology, like related, just like happy, floaty feelings watching a show done by people who love it as much as you do. And so the adaptation, while it's an adaptation, it's going to be really fucking good because they actually like it as much as you do and want to like, you know, like talk about the story. And like, I was remembering when we read Sea of Monsters that Sea of Monsters version of the Odyssey talks shit about Odysseus. Like that's part of why I liked it is because they talked about like Odysseus was mean to Polyphemus. Why did he show up at his house and blind him and then like taunt him? They even have Clarice like repeat that mistake by taunting him as they're leaving and it backfires immediately and everyone else there is like shut up.
Yeah.
So it's like they are very much talking mad shit about Odysseus for the majority of the Sea of Monsters when they talk about things to do with the Odyssey. And so I'm like, oh yeah, I'm remembering this now. This will be a really interesting like comparison between Epic and this because there's a lot of overlap with the fans. So the comparison is going to happen no matter what they do. It'll just be fun to see something like that be done by people who like really like the original story in a way that I think was lacking from Epic a bit. And so that's exciting. That made me be like excited again about things with the Odyssey. At least this version that talks shit about Odysseus all the time.
Well, let's see. So one thing that would be interesting with that is I really do hope they keep it. I mean, they still have both, so they're going to do the choice. But I want to see Dior really sell this. I want to see Dior really sell the overconfidence of, you know what, I can make it through that whirlpool. I don't I don't need to try to go near silver. We're not going to lose anybody. Like, I want to see Dior sell that so bad.
Hmm. And I have like a whole thing, a list of everything that we know about season two that we'll go through in a second. But I will say that one of the things about season two that I think would that that I know we mentioned like way back last summer that I'm still hoping that they do is add in scenes with her and Grover. So there's more of them because you don't really see Grover for the longest time, but on a show you don't have to. I'm sure they might decide to like not show a lot of them just to like make us be suspenseful about what's going on with them when they do get to the island. But I also am kind of hoping that they show something of them interacting because I also genuinely can't remember a time where those two characters interact. Um,
Too much, yeah. It's just when Polyphemus has Grover, like, I think Grover's tied up and Clarice isn't, right? And she's like yelling at him.
yeah,
Yeah.
like she's her plan was basically just to yell at Polyphemus a lot because and
Yeah.
that didn't work out in their
Laugh at
favor.
him and yell at him, and Grover's like, I don't want to die.
My girlfriend, like, please, somebody save me from this very angry person that won't stop yelling. Like, this is not a conducive way to like get off this island by screaming. Like, it won't work out. And so I hope that there's more of that because it would be scary, especially because she thinks that they're dead. Like
Yeah.
she thinks that Percy and Annabeth are dead too, and Tyson.
Grover thinks they're dead. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is during the part of the season where if it goes how the book went, that you think that Tyson is dead, and so it is like a scary thing that for that time when they think he's gone, that is the first time that somebody that they really know really well, they think they might be dead and never coming back. And that is hard for even characters like Clarice who act like she's a hard ass when we know she's not, which is very much like part of her story. Before we go into season two, though, we wanted to talk about. I wanted. There's J.K. Rowling. Um, there's a thing with her being the absolute worst, where she tweeted a picture of Orange Face and was like, I'll read it. Congratulations to every single person on the left who's been campaigning to destroy women's and girls' rights. Without you, there'd be no images like this. And it's a picture of Trump holding something stupid up with a bunch of all white people, like who are all women, of course, and girls, like standing around him. And um, I wanted to talk about that in the context of you mentioned it that the Harry Potter like
Yeah.
TikTok account was like posting.
They were queer baiting. So, and it was a very subtle queer bait because literally all they did is, you know how you can post photos on TikTok now? It was literally just a photo screenshot of from Chamber of, or sorry, am I thinking right? No, Prisoner of Azkaban, where Sirius is still like in his Azkaban prison suit and like they're in the Shrieking Shack. It's one of those screenshots. And that's all they put on there. But because Wolfstar is such a huge thing with this fandom, of course, everybody's like, oh, I knew it was canon, or saying things like that in the comments and getting excited for it. Exactly what they were trying to do.
Yeah. And like to be queer baiting is like this thing that like people have accused people of queer baiting. And I'm like, that's impossible. And so I feel the need to like define it just to like give people an idea of what it even is because what is has become like very weirdly distorted over the last couple of years, like online. But essentially, queer baiting is when like a studio, like somebody who's like trying to market something that they're making. It could be a celebrity, but it would have to be a celebrity that is like pretending to be gay to the point that that is their entire marketing campaign. Where you don't know anything else about them. Like the only celebrity that I've ever thought of that like fits is Tattoo, where like in the early like 2000s, literally they were known as these two Russian girls that were lesbians that would like kiss on shows. They were not lesbians. They were lying. They would like literally sit there and laugh when they were on Total Request Live back in the day. because they thought it was so funny that they became famous in the US just pretending to be gay,
Yeah.
because it was still such like a taboo, especially to women, was such a taboo thing back then. It was taboo in general, especially with women. And so unless you're doing something like that where you're pretending to be gay purposely because you just want to like shock people into listening to your music, that's the only way that that can happen. But most of the time it's like Star Wars did it with Finn and Poe. Like they asked questions about Finn and Poe getting together at Star Wars Celebration, the huge like official fan convention, the year that Rise of Skywalker came out. There was so much actual like marketing made by Star Wars about them that like a week before the movie came out, they had to put out articles saying that they weren't going to happen in the last movie, so that people didn't go into the last movie expecting it to happen. And John Boyega and Oscar Isaac were like, "This is bullshit. That they wouldn't let us do this. Disney, like people would never let them do that. They should, but they didn't, especially back then." And so I know it's only 6 years ago, but a lot of like queer stuff has changed a lot in that time. But either way, like that is a definition of actual queer baiting. People use it a lot when it's just like somebody that is like a famous person is just like maybe expressing that they're like exploring their sexuality. That's not queer baiting. That's just being a person and like trying to figure that stuff out. And if you like question them and accuse them of queer baiting every time, they're either never going to come out of the closet, proverbial closet, like Harry Styles, or they're going to be like Billie Eilish, where they feel like they have to because people are like pressuring them to do it before they're actually ready.
Yeah.
Like let people just figure shit out. And but anyway, the Harry Potter version of queer, that's queer baiting. That's like textbook queer baiting. They're saying that knowing that that's what people want, and they won't do it. They're getting people to try to like Harry Potter again by dangling that in front of everyone's faces, knowing that's something that everybody enjoys. There is no way that J.K. Rowling would ever, ever do that. Ever. No, absolutely not. And so they're getting your hopes up just to be crushed again for the 5 millionth time. Do not like play into their actual marketing. Don't reward that behavior because then they're just going to do it more. And we wanted to compare that to Rick Riordan because he has a Blue Sky account and he just has been posting like random Rick stuff on there over the last like especially over the last couple weeks. And he posted on there earlier this week. He said, "Later this month, we should be able to announce more details about the second Nico Will book that Marco Shiro and I have written, just in case you need the promise of some good news to look forward to." And like he said that on the 5th, which was like right after some absolute insanity by Trump, which is literally every single day. But that's a very different sort of way. Like he is saying, I have multiple canon characters. Two of them are dating each other. One of them is a bisexual boy, like teenage boy. How often do you see bisexual boys in like books, especially books written for children? They're usually it's like you're either gay or lesbian or nothing. And so he's like, "Hi, I have a bisexual boy who is Will and a gay boy who is Nico. They're in an established relationship. We actually wrote another book about them already that we already published, and we're going to publish another one when the White House is talking about calling all of those books pornography and throwing librarians in prison and putting them on the sex registry for giving them to children in school libraries." But he's still like, "We're going to put this book out anyway." And so, like, I'm not trying to say that to like make him a hero at all. He's not. But it's more of just the idea of like that's somebody that like actually cares about queer people because he wrote there's multiple relationships in Percy Jackson right now that are between queer people. And he's not queer baiting. There's no baiting because it just happened.
Yeah.
It happened. It happened. Like yesterday, I saw this video by somebody who's reading the Heroes of Olympus books for the first time. And she's in House of Hades. And I didn't even watch the entirety of her video because the first line was just funny because she was just like Nico. She was saying that Jason kept thinking about how Nico says that he doesn't like Percy, but he keeps doing things for him. And he's like, why does he keep doing things for Percy if he doesn't like him so much? And the person reading the books is like, does Nico have a crush on Percy or something? And they reveal that in like the next book. I'm pretty sure it's the next book and not that book. But it's just like she's figuring that out because he's just writing those how that actually happens consistently in a way that like is, realistic. That's how that stuff how people figure that stuff out. And but it was just funny how Jason, I do not remember that from the first time I read the books, that Jason is like, why does he keep helping Percy if he says he doesn't like him all the time? Nico. But it's like that's never queer, like the Ryrans will never queer bait. That's like one thing that we never have to worry about because
Yeah.
they
And like the clear distinction really is when you stop to think about it, there is not a single queer canon character in Harry Potter. It's all been either after the fact or some shit that J.K. Rowling has thrown in interviews. With Percy Jackson, it's canon. It's canon that there are queer characters. I want to say that I've heard that Rick isn't even totally like not okay with the idea that Percy may be bisexual.
he's fine with that. And I'm honestly curious to see if he like makes him that in the last book he has coming out next year. Just because that's like one of those unofficial things that everyone just has kind of agreed upon, that we think that he would be bisexual too. And so, yeah, and that's something that he people asked that about him with Luke. That they asked like, do you think that Percy had a crush on Luke? And he said that's not what I thought of when I wrote that. But if that's what you thought of when you read that, then go for it. And he said that in like 2013, like a really long time ago. He said that, and so he's been fine with that for a very long time. And speaking, like I was thinking about Titan's Curse because uh, if like we, it's very annoying that like just for like TikTok news, JD Vance is like the one in charge of the TikTok deal, who is our vice president, which essentially is not going to happen. Like there is no way that it would happen, and Trump would let somebody else get credit for it. That like it being given to the vice president, especially this president's vice president, means that's not going to happen, and he can blame JD Vance for it, and like Biden for it, and in like 2 months, it's definitely this stuff is definitely going to go away, which is going to make us all cry all over again, and probably more than last time because it's not going to come back after 15 hours. But one of the things that annoys me about TikTok going away is if they do announce Titan's Curse, and we don't get to all like
Oh yeah.
just scream into the void because it's all anybody wants. And like I forget a video that I posted recently where somebody posted in the comments about like, oh, also like gay like king icon Nico will be in Titan's Curse, and I was like, yes, like tiny baby like gay ass Nico will be in Titan's Curse as a 10-year-old little kid. And that's just even if they never say that he is for many years, it doesn't matter. We know he is, and everyone will giggle about it because it's just fun that a show like this already has like a gay character in it so early on. And yeah, and so it's like when you see that sort of stuff happening, and then you see like J.K. Rowling doing and Harry Potter doing the kind of shit that people would get away with in like 2009, and it's like no, like in like whatever year that was, the last book came out, and she was like, oh, like he was actually secretly gay this entire time, but I never wrote it in these books that got like exponentially longer. But I never once mentioned it because I'm a weak little baby bitch. And it's like, okay, is he actually gay, or are you just like pretending that he is now so that you can stop the people that are pointing out the fact that you don't have any diversity in your book because you're a fucking bigot? Except people were still a couple of years away from figuring that out. Like actually many years away, like 8 years away from figuring that out. But like that's the only reason she ever said that Dumbledore was, because it fundamentally does not make any sense that he is, and it actually falls into a lot of harmful stereotypes about queer people in general to have him be the one that is, considering that he's a monster.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's a fucking monster. That'd be like if in Percy Jackson they were like, Luke is gay and that's the reason why he's doing all this because he hates being gay. And like they would absolutely never, but that's like what it's like for them making Dumbledore gay off page. It would be like if Rick wrote a blog that was like Luke was always mad at Hermes because Hermes didn't accept him for being gay after the books were out that he never once mentioned during any of the books. Like, can you even imagine him doing something like that? No, because he's not a horrendous person. But I guess it's just don't accept the bare minimum from creators anymore. Even despite the absolute insanity that's going on with queer identity right now, we deserve way better than that.
Yes.
We don't deserve like scraps. Like you can take the scraps and go fuck yourself. If you think that we're gonna like let you like queer bait to people that you've been screwing over since 1997. I
Yes.
was 12 in 1997. I didn't even know what or Harry Potter was or Percy Jackson was, but J.K. Rowling was already screwing over queer people, and I didn't even know that I was queer yet. But she was still doing it. And so to talk about like season 3 a little bit, one of the things that Walker said was that this ending of season 2 perfectly sets up a much more darker season 3, which of course is when me and most people started screaming about when they will announce Titan's Curse.
Yeah.
Because that will be like a very intense emotional moment for everybody
Mhm.
because we all like it. Everyone obsessively talks about that book for a reason because it is really good. Most of our most watched podcast episodes, like
Yeah.
the top 3 or 4 of them are all just the end, like third of Titan's Curse. And it's just like, yeah, people really like that book. And so it will be a huge deal when they announce that. It's like actively terrifying imagining them casting Nico.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me feel good about it at least that Walker's saying how much he loves Scylla and Trip, just because I know that that's one people's like thing is that they're not sure how some of these large events are going to translate, so to speak, to like the show. And with Titan's Curse, they do a lot more traveling. It feels like they're on the actual road and actually in these larger sets. And I want to say Bianca's death in particular is going to be one where like it's hard to imagine how they'll do it.
Yeah. There's and I will say with this season coming up, one thing he mentioned too that we already knew about was that they filmed a lot more on like practical sets.
Mm-hmm.
Season 1, they the first people for Disney that used like the volume stage, and so they use that for most things. And this season, they were trying to use like real sets, even if they were sets that they build more than just depending on like the technology of the volume stage. And so that means that some of that stuff, like the bigness of some of those scenes, can be done on a set like this because if they're not using the volume stage as much, they have more money to spend on other things, like
Yeah.
things like that, on like big stages and things. And so they can definitely pull stuff like that off, especially um, since we're the number one show on Disney. Like, I don't think that was going to be an issue. Like during like this era of like studios having a hard time renewing shows, the fact that season 1 ended airing and like a week later they renewed season 2 and the cast was reading the first script 4 months later and they were filming the first season like a month after that, like basically 5 months after season 1 aired they were already filming season 2, and it's been a year since season 1 ended and they're already done with season 2 and we're just waiting for them to finish it and it's already going to come out. That's really fast
Yeah.
for a show like this. And so they obviously don't want to wait either and want to like make it happen as fast as they can. And so that makes me believe that a studio like Disney who has obviously lots of money, is fine with giving them whatever they need to like make this pay off because it made them a ton of money
Yeah.
last year. 3 billion like watches is a lot for to get in 1 year, and to beat out projects that made probably used a much bigger budgets than they did.
Mhm.
The Star Wars and Marvel shows probably got a lot more, and so they probably made much more of a profit because they probably had less to start with.
Yeah.
Okay, but let me just go into my crazy list of me just like being bored at work one day and trying to think of all the things that they said about season two. Because now that it's done airing or filming, we can try to like wrap up what we know about it or like what we've ever said about it.
Yeah.
Just to try to put it all in one place because we've been bringing stuff up since like July
Yeah.
last year. It was like June or July of last year was when we started reading like Sea of Monsters and after watching season one. And so it's been a while. Um so I guess the first thing that I realized like that I don't know why I didn't think of this, but they're very much doing like trios on both sides.
Mhm.
Like Luke's team of like Chris Rodriguez and Allison and Luke versus Percy and Annabeth and Grover or Tyson. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting how that's a like a smart idea to kind of mirror them in different ways. And it's like very fascinating to think about like what they will change or what they will add in for because Allison obviously doesn't exist in the books and Chris Rodriguez doesn't have that much of a part in Sea of Monsters. But considering that they recasted him and Becky said basically like forget about the person who used to play him, he's a completely different person now. That makes me think that he has like more of a role than he did in the original books.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's interesting to think about how they will show that, like the differing sides, the different ways that they respond to things. Um, because one thing that Walker did say is that this season, they said it's basically much quicker than season one.
Mhm.
That a lot of which happens a lot in like the first season of any like sort of show, especially that's building up like its own world is that in season one they have to do a lot of scenes to like establish characterization and like establish the world, but they don't have to do that anymore in season two. And so he said, like, there's like a he said there's like a monster of like every episode that they're going up against, and you can like I when he said that I literally just like went in my head and just like pictured like in my head who that would be for like every single episode. It was pretty easy to like figure it out honestly, but it was just a thing of like they do that, but he also said that like they don't really have time, that the stakes are a lot higher in this series than season one. And so they don't have like him and Annabeth have like their argument at the beginning of the season. And they never really, after they get in that argument, after she saves him from the Canadians, they never really have time after that to just like sit there and like talk until like the very end after
Yeah.
like the siren scene. That's like the only time where they actually have time to like sit there and like talk to each other about what's going on because everything keeps like accelerating. And that is a very like Odyssey theme to be
Mhm.
on some a trip or like something where every time you go somewhere something else happens and then something else happens and things just keep happening where you don't have time to like take a breath or like figure out what's going on. But that is something that he mentioned that they don't really have time to talk until like the almost like the end of the season to even
Mhm.
like work out the argument that they have because they just don't have time.
Yeah, they have to keep
They're
keeping on.
because they're just trying to stop things, and that's without like adding in new characters on for like Luke's side to make his side more like a real side. Like in the books, you only really see him most of the time. You hear about or and see sometimes the other monsters he has, but you don't really know that much about them.
Mhm.
But on a show like this, they can go into those dynamics more, especially if they do introduce the idea. This is like the thing when we talk about like the whole mole stuff that I hope for them to do is that
Yeah.
I kind of hope that they give us hints in this season that there is a mole at camp by how Luke knows everything about what's going on there. But I hope that they don't tell us who it is.
Mhm.
Because that's fun for like the kids that are watching that haven't read the books yet.
Yeah.
And it's also just fun in general just to see like if they change who it is, if they add in like Selena next season, or if she is in this season but they just haven't told us yet, or whatever they decide to do. I think it's fun to have those like mysteries to drive people crazy who don't know what happened, to wonder, and for us to wonder how they're going to present it as like Titan's curse and things like that go on, when the things that they're being spied on is like much more serious. It gets much more serious as every book goes on,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. Um, the one thing I think could be interesting too is Clarice, that she's a main character. And I know I've said this a million times, but the scene that I want the most in this season is when Ares is being an abusive person
Yes.
towards her. It is like threatening to hit her when he's not even physically there. I specifically want like Percy to see that and just be like, "Oh, damn it," and just like not know how to respond to that. Just to have it be something of like, "Oh, I actually understand this person." It's one of those things of that I was kind of saying last week, that like you don't need to be gross about showing traumatic things. You can show that kind of stuff without it being exploitative or just like too much. Like you don't need to show a kid being hit in order to give the clear idea that a kid has been hit and also recognizes that somebody else has been before. And a
Mm-hmm.
scene like that is a very like easy way to do it.
Yeah.
Um, but the other the thing with Clarice is interesting because we know from the little bitty trailer they put out that was actually part of like a Disney overall trailer for this year, that him and Clarice get in a full on like fight
Yes.
at a certain point, and so part of me is like curious what happens that makes her um, start to like him. Maybe it's the end when he gives her the fleece.
Maybe. Yeah. And I'm sure they probably place the fight. I mean, they almost fight when she helps them with the Hydra, right? And she's just like, "Oh, you guys are here. You're not supposed to be here." Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, and so the other thing from that, that I thought of, that I was like, I don't know why I never thought of this before, but it was basically just about like, will Luke try to recruit Clarice? Um, and because he tries to recruit everybody else, and I that's why I really thought it was smart of the show to have Luke in season one try to recruit Percy
Hmm.
instead of just trying to kill him like in the books, because trying to recruit him is way more like mentally messed up, to
Yeah.
have somebody standing in front of you being like, I'm your friend, even though I tried to send you into hell so a monster would like inhabit your body and kill everybody.
And I want you to come with me so that he can do
Yeah.
it
So
still.
like please come with me through this barrier and like and like abandon everyone that you just met so that you can help me kill everybody. Like, and it's just like standing there smiling at him being like, I'm your friend, Percy, and it's just like, what are you doing? And so he does do that with everybody else. Like he tries to recruit Annabeth. He tries to recruit Thalia. He does successfully recruit some other kids that we know of in the books. And so it would make sense that he would at least try to recruit Clarice, especially if in this version of it they have them run into each other more,
Hmm.
or run into like Allison or Chris Rodriguez or something, especially considering Clarice and Chris Rodriguez, that would make a lot of sense. Like a lot of sense if they would have him try to recruit her. Um, because they already have like, something happens with them in later books where that would make sense for them to bring it up now, or to bring up just them talking that way now. Um, and oh, the main thing that I think will be really interesting about season two is the Thalia and Luke and Annabeth flashbacks,
Hmm.
especially the Thalia and Luke flashbacks. And I did a video the other day saying that like Luke apologists, like the clock is ticking
Yeah.
when it comes to like how long this is going to last for you. And the thing I was thinking about were these flashbacks, because it's a lot easier, I think, for you to be like, Luke is just misunderstood. but watching it actually happen on the TV show is going to be, especially them saying that the season ends like setting up a much darker season three. There is only one person. There is one person, one that could be about. It is Luke, and there's just so many different things that they could show us in different ways to kind of,
Oh, they could show us him taking Kronos into his body.
yeah. And like the dream that Percy has right before the siren scene is him seeing that happening with Thalia, but he doesn't know it's Thalia yet, and that is a freaky, scary dream that has to be in this season somewhere. But it's also just not only that stuff happening in like the now, but it's also adding in him trying to kill all of them at the very end while also bringing up what happened in the past. And there's just like so many things that they could add in to show us. Like we've never. One thing Walker actually said was that he was talking about Zeus, that the new Courtney, I can't remember, Courtney Vance, who plays Zeus in the season. He said that he didn't have any scenes with him, but that the people who did were like really excited about it. And I can only imagine that the people are like probably Tamara and Charlie. And because I can, the only place I can imagine Zeus showing up is with Thalia in like flashbacks or something like that. Or him showing up like when he has to turn her into a tree and trying to do something to Luke. Or something like that, or just being angry or upset or whatever, because I'm sure that he was in that moment. Um, but there's just a lot there of like how Thalia and Luke met, like how the thing I always think is really interesting about that stuff is that Luke tells Annabeth about what happened, but that's like his perspective of what happened. And like Annabeth remembers a little bit, but she was a little kid and didn't really know what was going on. She only can go on what Luke tells her because the other person that was there is dead for most of that time until she's not dead anymore and tries to talk to her about it, and she doesn't listen to her anymore at that point. But like because of that, it's a very interesting thing of like perspective or like how people see the same thing very differently. That they could show that kind of thing of we know like what Luke has said happened, but that may not line up with what she feels happened or like what actually happened. And the show showing us those flashbacks of how they met or like what he was like before Kronos ever was around him at all is a very interesting thing to wonder about, like because Kronos wasn't there. He wasn't manipulating him for many years when him and Thalia were together and when she died. And so it is a very interesting kind of outlook to see him back then and to see if he's different than how we would imagine him to be or not. Um, and especially like setting up stuff for like the future. It's just there's so much with her there with him that they could easily show because no matter what happens, he definitely like let her down
Yeah.
in like, a big way, many times in a row, and like for like a while. And that Thalia of that time would probably point that out instead of the Thalia that is a tree and cannot say that to people. And so it'll be very interesting to see how that is like cut together while also showing like Luke trying to murder Percy while getting a monster to eat Annabeth and Grover to death, and then also showing like the people on his side, and then also showing like what's happening at camp, and then also showing him being taken over by Kronos. There's just so many things with that where they could set up in a lot of different ways to show like how dark Luke is, because season 3 we will get scenes of him torturing Annabeth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, get ready for that now, because there will absolutely be scenes of him mentally, emotionally, physically, like verbally, like abusing her and torturing her when she is being held captive by him. She goes into that being upset with him and she leaves that defending him, wanting to take him to Olympus so that he can like make friends with all the gods that he's been trying to kill. Like he does a number on her brain during that season when in the books you don't see her. The TV show we will see her because it's a TV show and that's what we're going to have to watch. And so in order for that to make sense, they have to set up Luke to be somebody that is so like devoid from empathy for people that he says that he loves,
Yeah.
that he would do that to her and like trap her in that, especially because in Titan's Curse the entire way she gets trapped is by him acting like he's in danger
Mm-hmm.
because he knew that that would get her, that would trap her underneath the sky. Like
Yeah.
that is just so disgusting to know that somebody cares about you and to use that to like trap them into something so that you can torture them for the next week.
Yeah, I'm on board with Percy of like, how did he survive that? He shouldn't have been allowed to survive that.
No, he should not have been allowed to survive that. And the other stuff with that thing too is like the interaction with Annabeth and like the Cyclops.
Mhm.
Um, it's like a whole thing of just Luke does one of the things that is always that I think this series does well that I enjoy when people write like abusive sort of characters like this well is that they kind of show how the decisions they make affect a lot of people around them in
Mhm.
a way that they don't necessarily mean to. Like how I was talking about how like Luke is okay with Grover thinking that everything was his fault because then he doesn't have to deal with people being upset with him. And if Thalia was mad at him before any of this stuff happened, he wouldn't want anybody else to be mad at him. And so if he doesn't have to deal with it if she's gone and nobody else blames him. But it's like that sort of a thing. Like they're not actively thinking about it that way, but it's more that they're okay with that stuff happening if it means that they get what they want. And so like Annabeth being horribly traumatized by having to stab a Cyclops in the foot when she's 7 and then watch Thalia die right after that is one of those things happen because of the decisions that Luke was making at the time.
Yeah.
And she was the one that got like he was obviously also traumatized by what happened with Thalia and stuff, but that's something that is so scary to her that 5 years later it's affecting how she treats Tyson in that season. And it's a huge part of her storyline in that season that she's so scared of those things that happened to her in the past that it's making her act a way that's not who she really is.
Mhm.
Um, which is a theme overall for her as the books go on with Luke. But it's just like that's something that he did to her, and she like doesn't realize that. But there's a lot of stuff like that with him where you just kind of see how because his choices are like me first, no
Mhm.
matter what. Like you see kind of like how other people are affected by those choices that he's making in a way that he just doesn't. It's not that he doesn't think about how it would affect other people, he just doesn't care.
Yeah.
And that's like the thing with people like that is they don't care enough about how those things will affect you to actually like change their minds. Like he tells Percy to his face, like, "Yeah, I tried to send you into hell. Sorry about that, but since you're here, do you want to join my team anyway?" And it's like that. It's like that sort of a thing of like not feeling bad at all in any way for what you did.
Well,
It,
and I feel like people have a problem with this. People have a hard time with this idea that like he has no empathy because his original starting point was something that people see as empathetic, which is like, oh, yeah, Thalia got turned into a tree and the gods don't protect their children. My dad won't even tell me what this stupid prophecy over my own head is. So they all suck and I hate them. But and yes, that's part of where it comes from. And I also suspect that, and I bought you Demigod Diaries for your birthday partially because I need the Luke slander cure. I have a feeling that if we read that and the actual account of what had been happening, it wasn't more so that he was angry that the gods let that happen to her, but more so that he was angry that it happened on his watch while he was trying to play big bad hero.
yeah, yeah. Like when I was saying this to a friend of mine tonight about Luke, but a lot of what Luke actually thinks you can see by how he describes things in the world when he's introducing it to Percy before you know who he really is. And he describes the quest as like you go on a quest to be big and bad and do these really cool things so that people like will remember your name for like generations, and people will be afraid of you, people will do what you want, people want to be friends with you because you have like this notoriety basically by doing these things. He sees quests as like fun, like fun, like fun things to do. And so the reason why he turns against the gods when he isn't able to kill Ladon when he's 16 is because to him like that's the way that he gets everybody to like be obsessed with him and to love him and adore him, because he doesn't notice that people already do. Everyone at camp already loves him, but he feels like he has to do this to be the absolute best so everybody will always know him. I was saying to that friend that I feel like him knowing about Hermes since he was a kid made him feel like he was better than other kids. That he like knew who he was the entire time, that he had met his dad, that he knew who his dad was, when most of them don't for so long, and that made him like need to like prove that in that way and willing to like line up with Kronos so that he can be the best, and like even if it means that he's hurting everybody, he still gets to be like the most powerful and the one in charge, and that's like the stuff that is the most important to him. Oh, the thing I was gonna say about like how things affect other characters that Luke does is that sweet baby Tyson is
Yeah.
also affected by Luke. Like Annabeth is horrible to him because of stuff that Luke did, and
Yeah.
I'm like, he is a sweet baby child. Like,
Yeah, it's like we know she genuinely trusts Percy. She trusts his judge of character. We know even her saying, like, I'm not gonna be nice to this one person who's been following you around is out of character.
mm-hmm. And it's just Tyson is such like a genuinely kind-hearted, sweet little person, that there is nothing about him that you could see and be like, there's something wrong with you. And so the fact that she sees him like that, you can literally see her like fighting against like what she knows she should be doing, but she just like can't stop being afraid of him. And that's like what trauma does to your brain, but that's because of the things that Luke did to her. Like the things that the decisions that he makes affects people for years afterwards. Like Percy is still traumatized by Luke years after he's dead and will be partly for the rest of his life probably. And it's like you can't just like do these things and just be like you can't be upset with me or like expect people to not be upset because this is how these things happen. We talked about Harry Potter already, but this is why stories like that feel extremely lacking and don't really feel real, because the way that they describe Dumbledore is just like not how that would happen. Like the things that Dumbledore and then like Voldemort do would have like ripple effects to like everyone else around them, and you don't see any of those effects happening.
Well, we hear like giant world effects, but we don't see them actually play out because, like, we know the wizards, and Rick did this in his books too, but it's not done in quite the same way. Where like Grindelwald is kind of implicated in World War II, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, yeah, there seems to be a connection between Death Eaters and I guess Nazis. I don't know, but like there's something going on there where it's linked to World War II. In this one, at least they like made the effort to be like this is how it's related to World War II and this is how it had consequences in our world.
Yeah, and like it's that alone is like the way to show the two different ways that a creator can handle it is like in J.K. Rowling's version, she just kind of like copy pastes that anything big that happens in like the human world has to be somehow affected by the magical world. But she doesn't really think through what she's doing. And so in her version, it's like, yeah, obviously World War II was affected by things with like Voldemort or like past generations when he was a lot younger, because that's just he is like the literal singular source for every single problem they have. And so it has to be him. If there's something that happened bad, it has to be somehow related to him or something to do with him. But in Percy Jackson, it's that they make the World War II connection to be like, that was so horrendously, horrifically bad that they all said that they would refuse to have more children for like 80 years after that happened, because that was so bad that they were like, we can never fuck up that badly ever again, where we caused that much damage and destruction to like the human world because we can't handle our own children. And so they just, so of course, because they're the gods, they just stop. They just say they should stop having children instead of like, and not like abusing the fuck out of their children. but but still, like, that fits with the gods of why they would react that way. But it is like, that's a very different way. Like Rick Riordan is like the empathetic way of like, we feel so guilty that all of these innocent people were hurt because of us. And J.K. Rowling, they don't give a fuck about the regular people. They call them a derogatory like slur basically in the books, and just talk down to him and talk about them as if they are stupid.
Isn't there like a part in the last book where the Death Eaters had taken down the London Bridge or something, and it's just very much like oh yeah, Muggles died on this broken bridge, by the way. Okay, moving on.
Yeah. And then in Percy Jackson, like Percy in the last book is thinking about how all of the regular people in New York are being affected by Luke's choices, and it's like, we need to stop this now before they get hurt even more.
Yeah.
My next note is about Percy and Annabeth's like angst, and my note, it's also Luke's fault, so that's fun. And I'm like, yeah, everything is his fault. Have you noticed that yet?
Yeah, so we have the growing tension between them romantically that is also fueled by this fight a little bit in a way. And that's going to be another thing that it'll be interesting to see how they handle, because of the kids getting so much older, and like, how awkward will that be for Walker and Leah in the scenes where there is a little bit more tension or things like that.
I will say that in one of the interviews, Walker mentioned that they were like, that they changed something or other about how they start season one, and the way that he phrased it was like, because I got so tall and got older, and I was like, can everyone just like stop with this? For the
Yeah, like complex. He shouldn't be bringing that up.
Sweetheart. That's why I'm like, you know what, Ryan Reynolds, I will beat you up. That
Okay, I want to bring up him saying that because okay, I don't know what I clicked on fucking Reddit to get the Percy TV series subreddit back on my feed. And you know where it does the thing where it's like, you might like this subreddit, and it shows you random posts that are popular on there. So the one that I think I even said something to you about it, but people have been kind of talking about this off and on, is that Rick has been deleting blog posts. And one of the blog posts that people have called out that he's deleted was his letter, his angry letter to the people that made the movies. And some people, the people that love to hate on the show, are speculating that the reason that he took that letter down is because they're now making a lot of those same changes with this series. So there's people speculating that they might age it up again, or that it might, I don't know what, I'm trying to think what else could have been in those letters where I could see them doing that in Disney, but I don't know.
That's very dramatic of them. He deleted every single blog he ever wrote.
Every single one.
Every single one.
Mm-hmm.
He just deleted all of his old blogs because they were old, and he was switching his website to like a new server.
Oh my gosh, that's so dramatic.
Literally all it was. That's why they're gone now. Like, they might put them back eventually, but like Becky said that like last summer, that they didn't think anyone would even notice, and they didn't think it would be that big of a deal, because they're just switching things around on his, like, he had the same website since 2005 when he was like a nobody.
Yeah, and he's still putting out new books. He needs a new website.
Yeah, so they just made a new website, and so a lot of those blogs are from like those years when things were just like different because it wasn't quite so big or whatever. And so it's not like that at all. It's just they literally deleted every single blog he ever did because they're going to put them probably somewhere. And one day, if they want to post them all again, they'll do that. But they don't need to do that right now. Those things exist on the internet, like obviously we have screenshots of all of them that I have saved from the Reddit post about it. It's not like they just disappear if he takes the blogs down, but it's just like that's an absolutely insane thing to say, that because the actors are actually alive and are aging like humans do, that because they're doing that, that it means that they're the same as the Disney movies, or not the Disney movies, as like the other movies that made them way too old to start with and then became stupider as more time went on. And so it's like I feel bad for Logan Lerman. He seems, I know he's a nice person because he played Charlie in Percy
Right,
being
he
a Wallflower.
nice enough in the interviews.
Yeah, and he seems very sweet. Like he got like emotional in that one interview about it, and it made me want to give him a hug and also hope that he can somehow be involved in it in some way, just to feel connected to like a good adaptation of it, basically. That's doing what you would want it to do. But Reddit is interesting. They need to calm down, like just slightly. I
I
know.
have so many mixed emotions about Reddit as someone whose most screen time is on that app.
I've told her this before, but Reddit freaks me out because everybody is anonymous, and so it just scares me because people say things on there that they would never normally never say. I refused. I like download it as an app and then immediately delete it. Like there's a Reddit post that I'm going to break up in a little bit, that I downloaded the app just to be able to see the entire post, and then immediately deleted it again from my phone because it just is, I don't know. It just scares me because it is a place where whenever you search about something, it comes up. So it's knowledgeable in that way, but it also has some of the most toxic, horrible things
Yes.
out on the internet that I just like can't. I don't ever want to be on it.
Between Google putting the search results super high for Reddit and this app's especially getting in, like getting a hold of Reddit, it's not the same thing that it used to be. I will say that the anonymity used to be like, I wouldn't say like a fully good thing, but it used to be a better thing back when people weren't thinking that every single post they put on Reddit is going to go viral and then get read to the a surfer, Subway Surfer like a game.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
then what else do I have on here? Oh, that they built like Clarissa's ship, as they Walker said that they actually like built the ship and everything, and that you see it at a certain point, like them building it in one of the earlier episodes. And
Oh
so,
yeah, Diora's gonna get so many pictures on that on her
yeah.
Instagram once she can.
And we talked about before, like you made a video about this, that we said that we think that thanks to your brother that the people on the ghosts on her ship are like different people from different eras, which is like really fun. I still hope that they can't speak the same language because it would just be really funny to watch them all try like yelling at each other about, like I like the idea of them trying to fight like Scylla and Charybdis and then messing it up because they literally cannot understand each other. And are just and like cannot communicate at all, because even in death they like, you wouldn't like suddenly know a different language, at least in the way that they present those ghosts you wouldn't. um so either way, I really don't think that we really don't think they're going to be Confederate soldiers. um that's a plus.
Not totally anyway. There might be one or two.
Yeah. uh oh yeah, and then just the last thing I remembered was Chiron and his whole thing. I really like Chiron in Sea of Monsters, especially at the end. One of my favorite scenes in Sea of Monsters that I haven't brought up yet is, in any way really, is when when he helps them get away from Luke, and then he talks to Percy about the whole thing about the gods want to kill me, and he tells him a little bit about the prophecy. But the way that that's one of my favorite scenes, honestly, in the books, is when Chiron tells him about it. Because the way that he tells him about it, he makes it very clear to him that it's his choice.
Yeah.
And that if he doesn't want to do it, he can say no. And he tells him, you can say no. Nobody can make you do this. If you don't want to do this is not like your responsibility. Nobody can force you to do anything. If you don't want to do this, then you're not going to. And that's like the end of it. And it's just, Chiron is such a good like figure like that, where he actually loves Percy and does try to help him with everything that he has to deal with. And so his whole storyline of being like kicked out of camp because of his dad being Kronos and stuff, and then being able to save them at the end and be there to like help him deal with that, and figure out how he feels about it before they go back to camp and stuff. It's just a really nice thing that's in Sea of Monsters, and I hope we still get that in
Yeah.
the book because Chiron, not exaggerating, is the only person that remembers that Percy has feelings in Titan's Curse. It's Chiron and Bessie, the sea cat. That's it. No one else remembers that. So I hope that they do a good job of setting that up. They did the scenes with Chiron at the end of season one that were not in the books. I really liked where he tells him like, "I'm afraid for you to go home because I'm afraid that Luke will try to hurt you if you go home," and just like those little things of him being worried about him, like you would want Chiron to be, is just nice to see that being added before they have to.
Yeah.
So I hope that I hope they add that in, and then oh, the end part was just the themes from the Odyssey. Was basically like Polyphemus is talked about in Sea of Monsters as a very like much more empathetic way. Like they literally talk mad shit about Odysseus for how he treated
Yeah.
Polyphemus, and like he has no reason not to hate. Like Percy literally says, like I would also hate humans if they treated me the way that Odysseus treated him. And so why wouldn't he hate me? Like he has every reason to. And you feel very bad for Polyphemus. You have a lot of empathy at the by the time they're leaving him on his island, even though he's trying to kill them.
Yeah.
They're still able to have empathy for him, and just like the endless problems that they run into in this season, it just like never really stops. Like once her, oh yeah, one note I wrote that I just skipped over was Hermes. My God, the drama,
Yes.
because it's Hermes. Um, but like when Hermes shows up at camp and is like, "Hey, get on that boat right there that I'm not going to tell you has my murderous son on it." As soon as that happens, it just like never really stops for them until the book is over, and that's still not over because Thalia is now alive, and they're like, "What's going on?" But oh, also one thing to add on with that is I'm almost curious to see if they add a scene at the end of the season of Chiron having to like tell her about Luke, or not, because
Yeah.
somebody had to tell her, and it would be very interesting if they let us see her finding that out, especially if they add on like ending flashbacks with them of him doing horrible things in the past that might like foreshadow why him being like that might not be as completely shocking to
Mhm.
her as it was for everyone else. It would still be it's still obviously upsetting to her, but she doesn't the way she talks to him in Titan's Curse, it's not like she's completely surprised that he's that angry. Um, and she wouldn't be. And so that's interesting. But one thing I want to ask you that I before I forget is one of the people on our YouTube that always leaves nice comments. Um, she was asking. They watched the video that we made that I posted about us talking about Persephone and Hades and then Medusa,
Mhm.
and they asked if there was anything you knew of or that we knew of in general where there was like where somebody wrote about like that version of Persephone and Hades that was written like a good way. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's just in Mandy's brain so far. But I wanted to at least ask you to see if you know of anything else.
Well, and I don't. It was news to me when I found out that Persephone is actually the subject of a lot of smut material.
Yeah.
Yeah, that Persephone Hades have a lot of fantasy, spicy books written about them. And I imagine that those might contain more elements of him being more of a supportive partner than like than somebody trying to kidnap her. And
I will
I
say
don't know
like
if they contain the motherhood stuff. That's the thing.
mhm. I will say
Like,
a lot of those like smutty sort of books are basically like romanticizing him being abusive towards her, which is
yeah,
why people don't like them. And that's if that's the only thing they know of like Hades and Persephone in a romantic way, I can understand why people don't like it if that's all they see. That's obviously not how we would look at that and at all, but in the same way that Medusa is usually seen as like, you know, a bad, like overly vengeful person in a lot of stories until recently,
Yeah.
when not how I would see her either. And
And
so I will say that like that's the whole thing with Persephone and Hades and Demeter is not to like say that Demeter is just a bad person because nothing is that simple, or like black and white, especially in these sort of stories where everything is very complicated and because people are complicated. It's more of just the idea that the Persephone could think that she wanted to get away from her mom to make her own identity. You don't have to think that her mom is like a monstrous, like horrendous mother, like Thetis in Song of Achilles or something.
yeah.
Um, but you could think of her like that, but you don't. But also, if you don't want to, you don't have to. And even if you're a good mom, your kid will want to have separation from you to make their own identity without you there,
It's
and
not
that's all that is like supposed to be. And um, I don't know why people keep writing smut like
well,
about that
it's not
thing.
my thing. And even reading this, because the smut is not like super erotic smut. It's not like, the terms are things that you would hear in a porno necessarily or things like that. It's very upscale, like romantic smut, I guess is what I would call it. I
Yeah.
don't know what to call it.
Uh, Madeline Miller is coming out with a supposed to be coming out I think this year
Yeah, you said Persephone one.
with the
Um,
Persephone Hades book, and she has quotes in like older blogs that she wrote on her website where she was talking about how the way that like Hades is seen as like worse than the other gods when he's actually one of the nicer ones when it comes to this sort of thing.
Yeah, you have to really rack your brain for a story of Hades where you're like, I don't like that guy.
Yeah. And she was
And
basically saying like he actually like asked permission from like her parents before agreeing to take her, which is something that a lot of the other gods don't do. And that like there's a lot of things in like the myths that support the idea that he is not like this horrible monster person. And so her depicting that would be the sort of like complex thing I think we would want out of that sort of story. So that book, if it does come out this year, like obviously Madeline Miller doesn't have to do anything but announce when the book is being published. So it's
yeah,
not like anyone knows, and it's not going to know until it's ready to come out. But it is supposed to at least come out sometime this year, and we'll definitely be like reading it on here if it whenever it does.
yeah.
Uh, so that's something. But
Well, and I do want to acknowledge, and I know I pointed this out before, but somebody in our comments said that they can interpret it in a way where Demeter is saving her from wanting to be married because marriage was forced on people. And I could see that being true, but we don't have what her actual motivation was in the story. Like, we don't know whether, well, okay. So I stopped myself there because people would argue, oh, she was really happy to see Demeter again. Um, but like, I don't know. I I don't know. Like that doesn't necessarily to me mean that she didn't want to not ever get married and stay with her mom as a little girl forever. But it does say I care about my mom and I didn't want it to be me never seeing the light of day and never seeing her again.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, but regardless, like, yeah, you can also write the story that way. You could have it be she didn't ever want to get married. She wanted to be a little girl and frolic in the fields and pick her flowers and stuff, which like great. And her mom was trying her best to save her from that. And that I'm not even saying that's wrong or I dislike it. I actually would be interested in reading that version as well. Um, but the reason that me and you again go for these myths where it's like not people's favorite versions, it's not the most ancient versions, it's ones that people tend to think are more fringe adaptations, is because of our own life experiences and because of how they mesh with ours. That's really it.
and there's we're not the only people that feel that way, and so we know there's other people like us too, and that it would be nice if we got stories like that to read sometimes when
Yes.
like those sort of stories existing doesn't negate any of the more popular ones being out there or anything like that. Um,
Yeah. And in terms of Medusa, I don't think that I know of any actual, like, somebody's written down the story of her being a priestess of Apollo, or wait, a priestess of Athena, and then getting essayed in her temple. I think that there's poems, though, that feminists have written. So it's
Mhm.
more poetry. And I'm not a poetry girly. I'm, like, I've only had to be in terms of translating. But I'm very much one of those girls that would rather read prose.
Mhm. Maybe one day if we can like think long enough, we would write like like short stories and just put them out and be like deal with it. Because that's like how we would do that. Just like, hey, these are really unpopular. What if we put them out at the same time and you can't get mad at us at the same time because you have to pick which one you're more mad at right now. um, but oh, one thing with that we talked about a little bit last time that I wanted to just like touch on again about like Greek mythology stuff before going into Song of Achilles because it is related to that sort of thing. That book in general is I talked a little bit about how I feel like a lot of authors right now write books about Greek mythology and dive into like darker themes because they feel like they can, like because they feel like they can dive into that kind of stuff and not like think about how it might affect their audience as much or just like think it through more because it's like, oh well, there's a lot of dark stuff that happens in Greek mythology, and so you can like write scenes of like rape and things like that when you normally might not because that's in the original source material. So people are more likely to just like accept things like that happening when in most stories they would be like, what the fuck is going on? Um, and for me, that uh, I don't like that because you don't have to like you don't have to give like explicit details or things like that for things like that in order for people to understand like what's going on or like the general like themes or whatever of these stories. You don't need to make like trauma porn in order for people to like have empathy for those characters or to understand like what they've been through. You just don't have to write it that way. And like I was talking about it last week in the way that people try to say that like Percy is like ruined how people see Greek mythology somehow,
Yeah.
which is that sort of a thing. And I'm like, it doesn't traumatize this audience like that. Like they talk about traumatic themes a lot, like all the time. Like the villain of this entire thing is a good looking guy who uses his good looks and charisma and smarts and stuff to manipulate and murder everyone that he's friends with. Like that's a very traumatic and like real to life sort of situation with grooming and things like that. And so you can cover very dark scenes and dark themes without going like over the top that it becomes like hard for people to read if they've ever experienced that before. And it is hard to read like things that Luke does, but it's not like as bad as other things are. And I saw an example of this where when I finished the Song of Achilles chapters this week, I just like wanted to Google the trigger warnings for Cersei again. And
Yeah.
I know that they're worse, but I still do want to read the Cersei book. And I understand after reading this post, like why I would want to read it or like why people like me would like it. Even if it is like hard, I also get why we would like it. And but I found this when I was Googling like the to find the trigger warnings list for it. This Reddit post came up of this 16-year-old girl who wrote a Reddit post talking about how she read Cersei and then went into a like intense like depressive episode for like months after she read the book because of how the book affected her. And she talked about how upset she was that all of these horrible things happened to her, that all of the relationships she had that were like meaningful were short lived, and the ones that lasted longer were the more like surface level transactional relationships where they didn't care about each other. And I was like, this sounds familiar. and and saying that like how could she have gone through all of that stuff and then the story is just over and what am I supposed to do with that, like that the story she just went through all this horrific stuff and then the story just ends and I'm supposed to just like move on from that. And especially she was describing the like symptom she had, because she was talking about how she got rid of the book. She didn't even want it in her house anymore. And because it, like, she just kept thinking about the relationship that Hermes and Circe have in that book. I don't know anything about what that is, but she kept thinking about it a lot, and just kept fixating on it. And she described um, symptoms that happen when you're remembering trauma, but you don't know you're remembering trauma. Like, she was saying that, like, she's usually very hygienic, and she stopped brushing her teeth, and she stopped taking showers, and she stopped taking care of herself, and she stopped doing all these normal things. She, like, almost dropped out of school because she failed almost every class she was in when she usually got really good grades. She stopped leaving the house because every time she did, she would start having panic attacks. And the way that she got fixated on the relationship of Hermes and Circe, that all of that, I'm like, that is somebody, and I can say that because I actually did this, like, that is somebody that is, like, remembering, but not knowing that they're remembering something that happened to them that was very upsetting. And they're fixating on fictional characters because it's like you can't get over when fictional characters are doing something that reminds you of something in your life, and you're trying to figure out why it happened to these fictional people, because that's your brain of trying to cope about what happened to you in your real life. And so, like, I was reading that and I was just like, and at the very end of all of this, she says, "Oh, by the way, I'm 16." And I was like, why did a 16-year-old girl read Circe? Like, or like, because she read it because it's a very popular Greek mythology book that a lot of people are talking about. But considering the trigger warnings of that book is like rape and incest, like actively happening on the page and things like that, and like children and babies dying, and other things like that, and like rape in like 4 different ways that I saw in like the trigger warnings. I'm just like, if you're going to make like a big published book like that, a teenager is going to read it, and that teenager went through a gigantic depressive episode for months of her life because she read your book. Mm-hmm. Like, that you should never, people should never be that traumatized by the experience of reading your book. That is not something that should ever happen. You can talk about these things without making your audience feel like they went through war. Because that's what PTSD is, like war.
Non-consensually, because as much as we're talking about trigger warnings, it's not like trigger warnings are written on the books.
No. Yeah. And it's also one of the things that's hard about trigger warnings too is that when you say like the word, like, okay, but like there are a million different ways of how that could be described in the actual book. And so, like, take Song of Achilles for example. And one of the trigger warnings was rape. The scene with Patroclus and Diadamia was horrifying in a way that I did not think. I did not think when there was rape. I thought it was just Thetis. I didn't think that in this story that I was going to read a scene of that much coercion happening in that horrific of a way, where the character is literally saying the things that you think when you've been raped, like the exact things that you think when you've been raped. And I was like, that was so much. And like a trigger warning just saying that there's rape in this book or coercion is in this book doesn't really completely like grasp that like sort of thing happening on, and like what the scene is like. There's so many different ways that you could write a scene like that. And it's just like that teenage girl shouldn't have been stuck in a depressive episode for months of her life, where like her life basically fell apart because she read this book. And like, yes, you can't, like, if all you can think of to say when I talk about this stuff is like, oh, you shouldn't read this if you know about Greek mythology, because you should know before going into it this sort of stuff is in it. And it's like, I expect to be treated like a human being. Mm-hmm. Like, I expect to be treated like a person. People know that people like me exist. We're not like a mirage. Like, you're aware.
You're not just here for arguments about abortion.
No, like, we're literally here. We exist. Sometimes we grow up if our parents don't kill us, and that's me. And so, like, it happens, and you know that it happens because you bring us up when you're trying to win arguments with pro-life people. And so if you're going to remember us at any other time, you should also think about us when you're writing these scenes and not just like be like, well, since Greek mythology is horrible with rape, I don't have to like try to think about this sort of stuff with an audience reading it. Like I've told her this for years, but
Mhm.
I've said like people for years have been like, you should write a book about your life. And I was like, how would I ever write a book about my life ethically? Because if anyone would read a book about my life, there's no way that they wouldn't leave like feeling extremely traumatized by it. And I'm not like trying to be like feel so bad for me or like watch out or whatever. But it's just the truth. Like I know that especially normal people
Mhm.
who, and by that I mean like people that didn't grow up with any sort of like trauma actively happening in this way in their family, if they read the stuff that was happening with my dad and then knew and then also read that he got away with it all and that nothing ever happened to him, that he was never arrested, that he didn't even get close to being arrested and ever in the history of his life, and he got to die, like granted alone in a nursing home with his brain eating itself from dementia, but still like he still got to live out his life and die without having to deal with any of the, I never even told anybody what he actually did until he was dead for 4 years or yeah 4 years. And so like that sort of thing, I know just that alone would be very traumatizing for people who have never been introduced to how this stuff actually happens.
Yeah.
um, they would be traumatized by that because most of the stories in the media are people who do eventually get arrested. And so the idea that they don't is like very upsetting. Like when I was when I was in my outpatient therapy program in 2019 that like made me stop wanting to die all the time, there was somebody in my program that was very sweet that we had like our own like rooms where we would do like work and stuff like that. Like our therapist would come in there and do like therapy sessions with us every day.
Mhm.
And one of them came into like my room when we were supposed to be doing like other work. And he was like all big eyed, being like, did your dad really never get caught? And he was like so upset and was like kept asking me questions, hoping that I would somehow say that he was somehow caught for something because he was just so upset that he got away with everything and like could not imagine how that could have possibly happened to me, and I was still like standing there and talking to him. And so like that's how most people respond to that sort of thing, and I'm like, I'm not willing to do that. I'm not gonna put anything like that out there that makes people that upset because there's no like, I don't want to, that's not fair to people. Like traumatizing them doesn't teach them anything. It just makes them get more desensitized to these sort of stories happening.
Yeah.
Um, I don't want to add to like that. I don't want to turn myself into a joke in a weird way to like get people's attention short term, but have nothing happen in the long term. I want things to change in the long term.
Yeah.
If I could figure out a way to like talk about that stuff and myself in a way that wouldn't do that to people, I would if it helped like that happening less in the future. But like I don't want to do that, and that's like I reading that post from that teenage girl, I was just like, that's horrible, horrible that she read that book and had that sort of response to it, and a lot of the comments underneath it were people saying how good the book was. And it was like this girl just wrote a post saying that she literally had to get the book out of her house because it made her so upset thinking about it. And you guys are sitting there saying how great the story was. And it's like
Yeah.
time and place, guys. But it was just like no teenager should read your story about Greek mythology and leave it feeling that way. And considering the like trigger warnings for Cersei, it makes a lot of sense that you would feel that way um, after reading it. And it's just there's a way to tell those stories without being like over the top, I guess.
Yeah.
With like just the trauma of it all. Like there's ways to talk about trauma without traumatizing your audience, I guess is my point. And I hope that people start balancing that out more
Yeah.
because it's just hard to like try to find books to read with other adaptations and stuff because I don't want to read stuff like that will just be really hard for me to read where I can't read it. I want to be able to. read other adaptations of Greek mythology or just mythology things in general, but it's hard to know like what is okay and what isn't because
Well,
it.
I don't like this idea that we have to accept that that has to be in every single story, or that it has to be told in a way that we have to think it's okay that there's no consequences in any story. I don't think that that's true. I think people are a little too weird about that for some reason.
Yeah, and it's like I guess the thing I'll say is like if you wanted to explore like super dark themes like that, obviously it's understandable why you would want to, but also fan fiction exists.
Yes.
And so you can just write fan fiction for free. A lot of authors do that under like surnames and nobody knows that it's them. Um, but like if you want to explore like really dark themes like that, you don't need to write a Greek mythology novel. You can just write fan fiction and then figure out a way to include it in a story that isn't quite so intense.
Yeah.
There's other options for you than to just do it like I don't know. It's this overall theme that people have that like I don't need to tell anybody details about my life for you to understand that it was bad. Like,
Mm-hmm.
do I need to like give you details about what like the actual ways things happen with my dad for you to know how bad it was? Like, no, that's ridiculous to say. You just know from what I said about it that you don't need to know more. And so, why do you need to read books that give you so much detail about it when they don't need to? They don't need to. They can do it fine without it. Um, so I guess we can talk about Song of Achilles now because these chapters were.
They're short, but short in the worst ways.
Yeah. And it was interesting because I finally figured out by the time we got to the third chapter, I finally figured out what I think Madeline Miller has been doing. While every time we talk about her doing something that's surprising to me, I'm sitting there being like, I don't understand why she's doing this. I think I understand now why she's doing it at least. So that's it's always nice when I think I figured something like that out, so I can stop like trying to figure it out at least. But um, I'll say the first chapter we read was interesting because I was like, so this is what like demigods would feel like who want to be like
Yes.
adored.
Yeah, so what we have is they arrive back in Pythia where Achilles' dad has set up a whole army, the Myrmidons, and Achilles kind of finally gets to step into this leadership role, and right away is getting people telling him he's Aristos Achaeon, the best of the Achaeans, that he is going to lead them to war. Like his Patroclus is saying, not only are people, you know, asking about the rumors that he's supposed to win the war for them, but they're like, yeah, he is. Like, look at him, he's gonna. And so people are starting to believe it. But what's interesting is as we have Achilles growing into this fame and starting to love it, Patroclus is really the only person who cares about the cost of this fame. Because as Achilles is like kind of bright and shining and everybody's cheering him on, Peleus says, before you all, I offer welcome to my most beloved son, sole heir to my kingdom. He'll lead you to Troy in glory. He'll return home in triumph. And then Patroclus says, even there beneath the bright sun, I felt my skin go gold. He will not come home at all, but Peleus did not know this yet. So, yeah, it's this huge price to pay for, you know, like this very short-lived, like we're seeing people cheering him on, people like everywhere he goes, they're like, Achilles, Achilles, Achilles. And he loves it.
Mm-hmm. And it's just like all of these people putting all of the responsibility on a 16-year-old kid.
Yeah.
It's just like that's so much for one person to bear, much less a child. I know that's not how they kind of see them in this time of life, I guess. I mean, people don't really see children like people most of the time now.
Yeah.
So they definitely didn't back then too. But it was it always bothers me how his dad is seen as like this nicer person. And I'm like, you're a rapist.
It's like literally you just went on the Golden Fleece journey. You're not that cool. You're not even the main person.
you are a rapist, you have a son because you raped somebody, why are you being rewarded for this behavior? But you are, because he's seen as like, oh, don't tell Achilles' dad that he's gonna die one day, let's like keep that secret from him so he doesn't know. And it's like, why? He's a horrible person. Like, why is he the only one that doesn't know? And why is he being like, I'm pretty sure that he's going to be upset regardless. But it's just a weird thing that all of these people around Achilles have decided not to tell his dad because they want to like protect him from that, I guess. And it's just so weird. Like, prophecy stuff is weird in general because of how people respond to it. I think it's interesting to see how the different characters and all these different adaptations respond to being told like something is going to happen no matter what you do, sort of thing. Um, but it's just kind of, I don't know. It was just weird reading this because I was just like Achilles really likes all of this attention and this, and that's just so like foreign from me that I always just like can't relate. I just can't relate to
Yeah.
feeling like that. I just can't.
Well, and the amount of responsibility too he's getting on top of this. So Patroclus points out that, like, for him, this is weird watching Achilles go out there to cheering crowds because he knows that now there's an expectation of him. He's gonna have to know everybody's names, what their armor looks like, their stories, what ships they're on, and that's part of it. But that's like that's what 16-year-old Patroclus is thinking. He's not thinking he's going to have to go out there and actually kill somebody until a little bit later. But like he knows that Achilles has had this very privileged life of just being a prince, training, playing on the beach with Chiron. Like he's never had to do anything.
And now he has to do everything.
Yeah, so they bring up the myth of how the Myrmidons got their legend or their legendary name. I have to point out this is Ovid just because of us. Like that this comes from Ovid. This is at least where we know it from. So Juno, Hera, she sends a plague on Aegina because it's named after one of Zeus's affair partners. And this plague was getting really bad. Like, all of the animals were dying, all of the people were dying, crops were dying. And one of Zeus's sons lived there. He was like the product of this affair. And so he starts praying as he's watching these ants climb up a tree. And he's like, I want that many men back. Like, because we've suffered some pretty big losses with this plague. I want that many men. And then the ants just start turning into men, and they're very loyal to him, and they want to take his commands. And so Achilles' men, being the Myrmidons, being these people cheering him on, like literally, it's really interesting. It's very much trying to show these people are going to be ride or die for Achilles.
Mm-hmm. And it also is like a weird like depiction because it's not something I think people would think about during this time period, but it's a parasocial relationship. Like, they don't actually know Achilles and they don't know who he is. He performs when he's around them. Like, he doesn't touch Patroclus and stuff like that when they're in public because he knows that would like backfire, and so they act differently when they're in public than they do when they're private. People don't actually know them. They don't actually know anything about them, but they're willing to die to like protect him and feel like he's going to save their lives when they don't even know him. They only know like the kind of like idealized version of him that he puts out in like his public persona when he's around them. And it's like that sort of an idea of this is a 16-year-old who is trying to act like he knows what he's doing. He has no fucking idea what he's doing. There's no way that he possibly could at that age, especially when he's never even been in battle before. Most people have never even seen him fight before, and like granted that's because he's so good that they don't want to like make everyone else feel really disappointed in their ineptitudeness compared to him. But still, it's like he's never been involved in anything real before, and now he's going to be like put in front of that, and also has to be seen as like a leader. So how is he supposed to like handle when things are difficult? Because he won't be allowed to show that affecting him, because then everyone else would look at him and be worried because he's being affected. And it's just that whole thing that happens with those sort of parasocial situations is
Yeah.
that they have pressure to like live up to people's expectations of who they think you are. And it's I like how she's including that stuff because it is a whole thing with like myth stories like this of like what the stories say happened and then what she is saying in this book actually happened.
Mhm.
And both of those can exist at the same time, and it's like up to you to decide what you think actually did happen. But it's like that sort of thing she's trying to show of like who we know Achilles as versus like who everyone else in this world would see him as at the same time, and they're very different people.
Yeah. Let's see. So we talked about how Peleus is not going to know this prophecy. He doesn't know it currently, and Achilles talks to Patroclus about how they're not going to tell him before they leave. And as they're leaving, it's kind of like, wow, so we're really not going to tell him. And then so Achilles says that he made his mom promise not to, that because like she's the one person who would. And then the way he had said it suggested he had promised more than one thing, or asked for a promise of more than one thing. And so Patroclus is like, "What else did you try to make Thetis promise?" And he says, "After I die, like, will she protect you?" And so Patroclus knows what the answer is, but asks, "What does she say?" Or what did she say? She said no. But I of course couldn't help but like my poor Patroclus meter went off next two paragraphs where he's like, yeah, I kind of figured she would say no to that, but the fact that he asked at all is what gets me. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, you and your low self esteem, dude.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah, the especially just the fact we are literally halfway through the book, and he already knows I did not plan to live after he was gone. He goes before Achilles technically, but like at this point, he's already so determined because he thinks his only worth is being with Achilles.
Yeah, he doesn't think he has any worth on his own.
Mm-hmm.
Considering like what's happened in the story so far in his life, I don't. It makes sense, like from a traumatized person's perspective, why he would feel that way.
Yeah.
Um,
Let's see. There's like a brief little section here where he gets a gift from Chiron, and it's a spear. I just thought it was big foreshadowing in here. So the whole last paragraph is this beautiful spear had been fashioned not in bitterness but love. Its shape would fit no one's hand but Achilles, and its heft could suit no one's strength but his. So I mean, we know how Patroclus dies from the Iliad. He goes blazing into battle in Achilles' armor because Achilles isn't fighting, hoping to just scare the Trojans off for a day. And I have to imagine him not being able to actually hold up that spear was probably a big factor here.
mhm.
And yeah, I do think Chiron knows his destiny because that's part of what he's puzzling as he's looking at this very, very thought out, crafted spear. He's like, does Chiron know, like, he's going to be defending his very life with this? Like, this may be it. And yeah, Chiron knows, even if he doesn't know because of just the prophecy, he knows because he's been there, done that. He's seen this happen with so many heroes.
Mhm. It's just something that's going to happen again.
Yeah. Let's see. So quickly moves into the next chapter, which is where they end up on Aulis. Now, this is the one thing where I was like, oh yeah, they might put that in there, and I'm surprised at how fast their whole like thing at Aulis goes down, considering that they were stuck there with a plague and no winds for months. Like, but this chapter is I don't know what, like 5 pages. It feels so small. So we find out that Agamemnon wanted to gather and assemble the forces on Aulis so that they can all go together. And I think that's because man loves the drama. He likes the idea of all of the ships sailing in together, and you get that like that picture. I think it's in the movie Troy where they even do that, and you see them looking over the walls, and you just see a bunch of ships.
I
Uh,
am baddest bitch alive if I have more ships than you.
That's the
That's
only way
literally
you
what
can
that
bring the
is.
drama back there, back then. So, let's see. They get into camp. Everybody is happy Achilles is there. They've been waiting for weeks, some of them, because remember, Achilles has been in hiding, and some of them have already been gathered. So there's people that are already restless, waiting to go. There's people that are also just arrived, and you can feel everybody just in the air, taking in Achilles because they know what he means to this war. And Thetis gives him his moment. This I knew it was Thetis before Patroclus even acknowledged it was Thetis. Um, so as soon as they see him, Prince Achilles, son of King Peleus and of Goddess Thetis, Aristos, why can't I talk today? Aristos Achaeon. As if in answer, the air changed. The bright sunlight broke and poured over Achilles, went rolling down his hair and back and skin, turning him to gold. He seemed suddenly larger, and his tunic, wrinkled from travel, straightened until it shone white and clean as a sail. His hair caught the light like a buoyant flame. So I knew that that was Thetis. He says it in like the next paragraph where he's like, "Ah, that must have been Thetis helping his divinity shine out." Yeah, if your son is going to live a very short but glorious life, and you're sending them into that final battle, you're going to shine up their armor. You're going to make sure that they feel like the biggest, bravest boy out there. Um, it's just like, what else can you do? It's not like she can stop it at this point.
Nope. That's the best you can do is make him feel really confident, hoping that that feeling like lasts once things start going bad.
Yeah, and I want to like Thetis so much. I want to like her for her other mythology. I don't like her in this, but I totally got that when I was reading that. I was like, no, like her son is going out into his final battle. Of course, she wants him to look fucking good. She does it again when she gets him Hephaestus's armor. She's just constantly like, if this is going to be the big one, it's gonna be the big one.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. But what Achilles chooses to do, and this is where I think she may have been coming from this whole time with making him seem somewhat neurodivergent. Because he gets called into an assembly with all the other kings. And he gets put before Agamemnon, welcomed, and all of that. And everybody's waiting for him to kneel and to pledge his allegiance and say he's going to fight for him. But he doesn't take a knee at all, ever. He just kind of like stands there waiting for things to keep going. And Odysseus kind of has to push things along, like are we going to say something or are we going to do something? But
Nope.
and what's interesting is we also see that this dynamic is already kind of going to get, I don't know how to put this. It's going to get supported by the rest of the troops because they're all already frustrated with having been there. Like all of the people who have been there for weeks waiting for everybody else to gather, they are laughing their asses off at the fact that, like, she doesn't say this. It even cuts off. It says, after such tedium, they said, looking slyly at Achilles, they welcomed any harmless entertainment, particularly at the expense of, and it cuts off. But Agamemnon's the one leading this charge, even though it's Menelaus' wife. They're sick of that dude. This big, like, scary-looking dude who's bossing them all around. And so you have this little 16-year-old, like, holding his own with them.
Yeah.
People fucking love it. People probably were really, like, waiting for the tea every morning when they woke up. Like, did they fight again last night? What's going on? Like,
Yeah, and I will say, as like an autistic person, that it's not that we don't know or notice when there is like a social cue that we're supposed to be doing. We can
I think
tell.
he noticed and didn't care. He was like, I'm not gonna fucking take a knee for this dude. I didn't take the oath. First of all,
That's like something about us that I'm not sure a lot of people know or who don't know any autistic people that have explained this sort of thing to them before, but we can tell when we're supposed to be doing something, but a lot of the time we don't know what that thing we're supposed to be doing is, or like we don't know how to do it, but we're like very aware that there's something that we're supposed to be doing right now. And then we start like panicking inside our head because we're trying to figure it out and we have no idea and just keeps going on for longer. And sometimes we do know and we don't do it on purpose because we don't want to. And that's Achilles in this. He doesn't do it. He knows what he's supposed to be doing.
yeah,
He doesn't want to. And so he doesn't care enough about like making the other people happy to do it anyway. And he's just, it's so funny when Odysseus is like, are you gonna do something? And he's like, no, I definitely am not doing that, bro.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I get why he's doing it because, like, it's one of those things where, when people talk like, "Oh, the neurodivergents are the real weirdos," like they really are because you think about he didn't take the oath with the rest of the suitors, so he doesn't have to be there.
Mhm.
And these people he's in front of right now in this moment know that he has a prophecy over his head that he's gonna die there. And
Mhm.
he is 16. They're in their 40s. And so, yeah, you want this kid to come say, "Yeah, I'll die for you." Um, he's like, "No, I'm only here for the glory and maybe to get some money to get sent back home with my body, I guess." So, no, we're not doing that.
Like they're literally using him so that they can win some war because they want to make a bunch of money.
Yes.
They don't actually care about like Helen or anything like that. They just are doing it to as a way to try to grab more power. And especially Agamemnon is
Yeah.
doing it, especially him, to like get more power for himself.
Yes, and Agamemnon loves these power plays because he takes the bait with it, Achilles right away. I mean, we've seen this back and forth in the Iliad, but what happens here is because Achilles didn't kneel, instead of Menelaus sending or going out himself to go greet Achilles, he sends out somebody on his behalf. And it's like, yes, this is still proper, but it's just that slight, like, it's a little bit improper that, like, that they're trying to say something. And so Achilles and Patroclus look at each other like, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" And Achilles even points out, like, sorry, Patroclus first says, "A man who plays both sides of the fence," because he thought Menelaus, by sending someone out and still showing that respect to Achilles, but by not sending himself out, that was him both pandering to Agamemnon by not going out himself, and then by saying "fuck you" to Achilles.
Mm-hmm.
So Achilles' response to that: "A man who cannot afford to offend me if he wants his wife returned," which is true. Like,
Yep.
that's honestly what the play is. It's not even that he doesn't side with his brother. I'm sure he's like, "Oh, that little kid was a punk, and you're probably taking it too seriously." But I don't think he likes Achilles.
Mm-mm. I don't think so either. There's just a thing of like Achilles knows like you need me. Like you went everywhere trying to find me because you need me in order to win. So like no matter how big and bad you are with your 1,000 ships or whatever, it doesn't matter if I'm not there. You're not going to win. So you have to deal with me.
Yeah. So we're already getting that start of the dynamic that is literally the setup of the Iliad. So next chapter we have, like, basically what I think is where Achilles is like, Agamemnon's a fucking dick. I don't fucking care about him. Like, this is where he's pretty much done with him. So chapter 18 focuses on them not being able to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not able to leave because there's no winds. This is a story that I'm pretty sure they mention it in the Iliad, but the actual, like, longer telling that we know is Euripides wrote a play about it. And so what happens is they land on Aulis, they assemble all of the troops, and all of a sudden the winds just stop working. They just stop working, whatever that means. And you don't know what that means. So I love that this actually plays out what that looks like, because we have Patroclus talking about waking up, choking on the air, and that it's super hot, and that they're barely getting any relief from even going in the streams. So we get kind of just like a feel of they're all scorching hot and they can't leave. Everybody's riled up because they're about to go off to war. Like, it's not good here. And Achilles finds out somebody's mad. Somebody's mad at you guys. One of the gods is mad, but my mom won't tell me which one. And so they let a couple months pass before Agamemnon finally decides, "Oh, I'm gonna listen to what Achilles told me and try to figure it out." And he like taps in Calchas, their seer, and Calchas is like, "Oh yeah, we anchored Artemis. It was actually Artemis who's angry. She's mad that you're going to do so much bloodshed over in Troy, and she demands, bloodshed in. Well, I'm skipping ahead. but she demands a sacrifice. So that's not the way that I've heard it put, but I believe Artemis was a Trojan sympathizer. So it's not necessarily outside of the realm of possibility from the mythology that we know.
Hmm. I thought it
Uh,
was very interesting how they like choose on the sacrifice because I was like, wouldn't this piss off Artemis?
well, yeah, and that's the part that people don't understand about the story. So the general story is to get the winds back because it was Artemis who was mad. They needed to sacrifice a young girl, and they chose Agamemnon's daughter. I don't know that she's always a priestess of Artemis in the mythology, but in this one she is. And that's part of why she was chosen, a young priestess, one of the youngest priestesses there is. What we do know about Iphigenia from the mythology is that she is basically the golden child of Agamemnon's little family. And so her mom was super happy when she found out, like, hey, you have to go meet them at the ships. You're going to go marry Achilles. So her mom and her were celebrating, like her going off and getting married. They dressed her up. They got, like, imagine that happy, fun wedding planning with your mother, that, like, the good kind, that you see on TV shows. They got that kind of bliss as they were on their ship on the way to Aulis, only for her to find out what happens. So, what we have happening in Madeline Miller's story is Agamemnon and the chiefs all ask if Achilles would take Iphigenia's hand, or Iphigenia, I've heard it said both ways, Iphigenia's hand in marriage, and he says yes. A few days later, she arrives. They set up this wedding. She's going down the aisle, and then all of a sudden, someone pushes Iphigenia down, and Agamemnon himself takes a blade to her throat. And so we find out that afterwards, Agamemnon was telling people, oh, she knew the whole time. She knew that this was what Artemis wanted, and she went willingly. We have Achilles freaking out, saying, I was right there, I could have stopped it, because he had no idea this was going to happen until he literally got splattered with blood. And then we have these grown ass men who watch this 13-year-old girl come in, hug her daddy, and then get pushed over during her wedding ceremony. Like, it's really infuriating. And it's interesting too how Madeline Miller wrote it, because the moment that everybody is like, what the fuck just happened? What the hell? We're not okay with this. They feel the breeze. And they're like, holy shit, it worked. And so like nobody knows what to do, because they can't feel that anger when they're like, wait a second, it worked. And but Achilles, poor Achilles, this is the first time he's seen death, and Patroclus is recognizing this because nobody was there for him when he was throwing up after that poor kid fell on the rock. Mm-hmm. So yeah, what happens in the Euripides version, and I said this last week, but just to like retell it, is that she does come on the premise of getting married, but she finds out before the wedding ceremony that she's going to get sacrificed, and her and Clytemnestra, her mom, are fighting for it not to happen. Achilles finds out too from them, and he's like, "Look, I don't want to be a part of this. I'm not okay with this." First, it's because of his own honor, but then he just like actually feels for Iphigenia, and he's like, "Yeah, no, you guys can't kill her." And so she eventually realizes, like, there's no way I'm getting out of this. Like, Achilles is going to try to fight them all and probably kill them all if I don't go through with this. So I just have to go. And so she willingly walks herself up, lets herself be sacrificed. And this is one of those texts that I believe is either fragmented or we only have a translation of the original version. And so there's fragmented versions where Artemis at the last second switches her out for a deer. And so Iphigenia eventually gets taken somewhere else to be a priestess, which is where the priestess thing actually comes in. So this whole thing happens so abruptly in the book, so abruptly that she's a character for literally 2 pages, and then she's gone. But what we see that Achilles is not equipped to handle the type of deaths he's about to deal. And Patroclus, He holds him until he cries himself to sleep on his lap, and then he goes to Odysseus. And nobody even knows who Patroclus is, who he even is, as he's walking in. And Odysseus is like, "Look, you have to help him toughen up because he's gonna have to kill a lot of people, like a lot of people. So he can't be Mr. Sensitive while he's out there taking out Trojans." And Patroclus, you can tell he's who would want that, right? Who would want to take out the sensitivity of this beautiful man that they've fallen in love with?
And also, like, fuck off, bro. Go be an edgelord somewhere else.
Yeah.
To be like, he has to be. Shut up. Like, that's what people say that kind of stuff to you when they're just trying to shut down you being upset. And it's like, if you see a 13-year-old girl get sacrificed by her own father, and they mention in this, like, part of the thing I remember is that they meant that Madeline Miller mentions that Patroclus sees that she's surprised, and so in this version she has no idea.
Yeah.
And you there's like a throwaway line about her mother, and I'm like, what about her mother in this version? Like, what is her mother gonna do after she finds out what happened? That they sacrificed her daughter for a war?
Well, if it's any consolation, she has an affair with his cousin and then she kills him when he gets home. So
Pretty good because he deserves to be killed after just this one thing, much less anything else he's ever done in his life. But um, so when I read this part, the thing that I realized about Madeline Miller that is just like, I don't know how I feel about it necessarily, but I realized like she will do literally anything to make Achilles not have any sort of like moral or ethical culpability with anything ever. And I was like, now I understand what you're doing here. And the thing of why I don't know how to feel about it is that because he's very much written as like an autistic person, it feels vaguely ableist. And Jean, who is a mutual,
yeah, I've been wondering where that was coming in.
yeah, she said she's somebody. I'll put her username up here because anyone should follow her on TikTok and also on Blue Sky, and also tell her to make a YouTube page so it's not just me telling her to do that all the time. I keep telling her to make YouTube about. She goes into all of like the AI that's in like book art right now and points out when an author is using AI and pretending like an artist made it, and which is necessary for how much is out there right now. But I asked her before we started reading this book. I asked her what she thought about it, and because she reads books a lot, and so I know she likely read this one. She said that she DNF'd it or like stopped reading it because of the ableism in it, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. That I wonder like where that will show, and I'm like, yeah, this is very. It's a very like ableist sort of concept. The idea that somebody who is neurodivergent of any sort, but I'll go with autistic because this is a stereotype about us, is that we're like very like simple minded and like childlike or like just can't make these sort of like complicated decisions or choices or like morally like complex things that we're more it's a negative stereotype about us is that we're like children and that you need to like baby us and that we're very ignorant about life and like people usually bring that stuff up when an autistic person has done something horrible. Like there are people trying to do that about Elon Musk after he did that salute. And that was so gross that I actively just like ignored every time anyone said anything about that because I like couldn't even handle the idea of somebody trying to say that and use autism as like an excuse for doing something like that. But that is something, and that's what it feels like. Is like she will like quite literally write him being raped by somebody and have the same girl rape Patroclus the next day so that he doesn't like cheat, quote unquote cheat on Patroclus. And it's like you could have just had him be a bi king, like uppercase bi, uppercase king, and just have a little like thing with her when he didn't know if he was ever going to see anybody again.
Yeah.
That would have been fine, but it's and and like the way that like Thetis is like so like over the top like boy mom sort of thing. It's like it's like this weird thing of like she feels like she needs to like over like protect him all the time, because if she doesn't, like something really bad will happen to him. And just, and in these chapters, Patroclus is like so mad at Odysseus, and like Odysseus is being a little bitch. Like be mad at Odysseus for being the most like whataboutism person alive, like sitting there and being like, "Oh, well, you can't be upset with me. I just knew about the 14-year-old girl being murdered." And it's like you knew about it and you literally sat there and didn't try to stop it and or warn anybody about it, or like I don't know, try to save this. And especially how Patroclus has to be like, "What if it was your what?" And he was like, "I don't have a daughter." Like,
That's the most smartass Odysseus
yeah,
answer.
I've had conversations with people like that, like online, that are like, I don't care because of this one thing. And it's like, okay, what if it was somebody you actually, what if it was your wife? Would you be okay with your wife being sacrificed for you? Let's not even pretend like you would ever be okay with that. Please shut up. But so, like, you have reasons to be upset with him. I'm not saying that you don't, but in the context of the scene, Patroclus is more upset at Odysseus for what happened to Achilles than what happened to the girl that was murdered. He is upset because Achilles is sad. He's upset because Achilles had to see blood, and he's now like somehow scarred by that. And like the way that in this chapter, another sidebar about this chapter is that they mention that the sacrifice has to be virgin blood.
Mhm.
No, I will stab you. Stab anyone to death that talks about like virgin blood being anything worth anything more. How can you tell? Like, how could you even tell what is virgin and what is not?
Men are just admitting that they think that they taint us.
Yeah, and it's just weird. Like, I have literally had entire therapy sessions where my therapist argues with me, trying to get me to believe that I could be considered a virgin. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And she's like, yes, you can be, because you never made like a choice about that. And so you can be that because you've never actively made the choice to do that before. And I'm like, but I'm not though. But yeah, that's literally our discussions. Is like I feel like I'm way too tainted to ever be seen like that, to be seen like as like innocent, but I'm also innocent, but I'm not innocent at all. And so I hate the whole virginity complex thing anyway. It feels really gross and like puritanical. In any context, and especially in this one, when you're like, well, I have to kill the 13-year-old because she has to be like a virgin blood, because apparently if you had sex before, or, like this entire thing feels so weird that like why would Artemis, out of every single god, why would Artemis be pleased by you killing a young girl when you're forcing her to marry a man she doesn't want to marry?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, she did want to marry Achilles. That's the thing, though. She did want to marry Achilles, but you're right. Like, you shouldn't be killing a girl for Artemis. That makes zero sense.
yeah, and it was just, that's like what I feel like she's doing with Achilles, is that she's, it's like this weird ableist thing of like, oh, because he's like autistic, he's more like simplistic and innocent, and he could never possibly do these things. So instead of him just like having feelings for more than one person at a time, he has to be raped. And Patroclus is acting like his fucking overprotective dad in this scene, like the way that he's yelling at people. And it's like, yeah, you can be protective of people that you love, even people that you love like romantically, I am sure. But it just feels very weird that he's mostly upset that Achilles was sad, as opposed to like what actually happened. And I'm like, Achilles is supposed to be this amazing like warrior, and everyone's talking about him as if he's like a newborn baby crawling across the floor. Like, he's 16 years old. He's been training his entire life for this. He's not like this tiny little child that, like, yes, he hasn't had to kill people before, and that is always difficult, but he's not like that in it. Like, he's been training to for battle and be told he's going to be this huge warrior his entire life. He's like a person. He's close enough to being an adult in the context of this story that he can like handle this stuff without everyone like babying him in this weird way, and just feels weirdly ableist the way that it's being written, that like because he is autistic, that that's the way that he would, because autistic people could never possibly understand this stuff or do this stuff. And it's like, yeah, we can. Like, autistic people can be the villain sometimes. We can do whatever the hell we want. And so it's like, yeah, just because you're autistic doesn't mean that you don't understand or whatever. And like, yeah, there are times when we get overwhelmed or overstimulated by things that other people don't, but it doesn't make us like childlike or like innocent. It's just purely just being upset at something. And so I was like, well, at least I understand why she's doing this now. And it is like I guess I'll just say it's like an interesting choice that because it is like disruptive within the context of the story, I think, to change things in certain ways. Like even like with Epigenia, she's like barely like I didn't even realize who she really was until it was happening because it happened so fast. But in this version of the story where Achilles can't have any responsibility or culpability in anything that is seen as like negative, it has to happen that fast.
Mhm.
And so like no wonder why the like female characters in this story are shafted, like her and like Diadamia and Thetis and stuff. Because if you're going to like write him as somebody who can't do anything that is seen as like ethically in a gray area really, or at least up until this point, the other people around him have to be the ones to do those things. You can't have Patroclus doing those things very much because he's the point of view character of the story, and you don't want people to start to turn against him because that's the entire point is to love him.
Mhm.
And so you can't have him do it, and so you have to have the female characters do it because they're the only other people around. And I'm like that's and honestly when I read that I was like, how old is Madeline Miller? Because this feels very like Gen Xy way of talking about autistic people. And
Yeah.
so I think that she is older like that, and that would make sense um, because older ish people, if they've never tried to learn anything else, they would think that about us because that was the prevailing theory for a long time and still is. A lot of the TV shows and stuff made about autistic people, it's like the stereotypical like savant sort of role where they're like a like an amazing like genius, but also at the same time like I'm like a baby and don't understand social cues to the point that I'll like punch a girl in the face and not understand why it's wrong. It's like like we understand that that's wrong. That actually happened on a show about I think that was on Atypical where like a girl on that show like her ponytail like hit the main character that was a teenage boy that was autistic. He like slapped her or something and the show makes it sound like he doesn't understand why what he did was wrong or something like that. Like they very much like baby his response to that, and that's no good at all. And so I'm sure that it's something like that, and it is interesting to see this pop up in this story because I'm like, if you didn't write him like this, the story would probably be better.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm like, well, at least I understand what she's doing now, and I'm not just sitting here like, what the fuck?
Well, I mean, these stories have only been around for thousands of years, so they can only keep getting better, right? I mean, they can keep getting worse too, but like, there will eventually be really, really good rewrites of them.
Yeah. And it is, no matter what, it's a very interesting way to describe Achilles for one reason or another, like to get to the point where he's described as a like an autistic person. And nobody is like up in arms screaming about vaccines.
Well, it's what's interesting too is we have Achilles. His anger at the beginning of the Iliad is him going into this room of these older warlords and just screaming and like being like, "No, we're not doing it your way. We're doing it my way. I'm here. I'm the fighter. You guys need me." Like, fuck no. It's just dialed up from what we see here, all of the frustration and built up emotions that they have because they're trapped on an island. Um, but yeah, they feel that too when they're in Troy. And um, poor Achilles. Like I don't know. It sucks because like you want better for him at this point. Like you want him to have his hero moment, but not in that way. Like this guy is smart and sensitive, and like his hero moment can be something that's different than going to Troy and killing everybody. But
Mm-hmm.
that's what being a hero meant, you know? And when people talk about that, oh, well, back then, like, yeah, if you wanted to go out and fight battles, you had to go away and do it, and this is the way to do it. But I don't know. I feel bad that this is the way that he's going about it.
Well, and it is like an interesting way to show that the general themes that we've seen in Percy and other things involving, but especially Percy, since we've talked about that the most, that the idea that like being this sort of hero, like the way that the gods want you to kind of be a hero, means that you're basically like sacrificing who you are
Hmm.
person and like letting that your personality, like how people know you and how you're remembered after you're gone, be kind of like overrun by like this other persona of you. And it sucks to know that that's just going to keep happening with him. Like one good theme of that in Titan's Curse was how they talk about Zoe and
Hmm.
how she was this like unknown person that was treated horribly by Hercules, and he's seen as like this huge hero. In the context of that world, they're like, but he's a jerk, and everyone doesn't like him because of how he treated her. Um, but like that's like kind of how those heroes, the big ones that do like what the gods want to do, it's like if you're gonna make try to make the gods happy, you're gonna end up doing things that hurt like normal people, like your fellow demigods or just normal people, in order to please them. And so that's like a more realistic way of looking at those sort of heroes. In this story so far, they're like trying to toe that line of showing like how everyone else sees him while we see him in a completely different way at the same time. And that at some point the like hero worship basically that people already have for him is gonna start to like overtake like who he is too, and it's just hard to know that that will happen because he's gonna die one day soon, and there just isn't much you can really do to try to stop it.
Yeah. So in terms of next week, I think I've mentioned Amazons. They must happen after they already landed Troy. It's one of my blind spots when it comes to this kind of thing. But I know there was kind of an encounter between Achilles and a Amazon named it's something long with a P. I want to say Penthesilea or something like that. Um, yeah, my knowledge with that stuff isn't great, but that could possibly be coming up. We might do a time jump like they did in the Iliad. It's hard to say because there is so few like in between myths of what happens before they have been on the beaches of Troy for years.
Mm-hmm. It'll be. No, I honestly don't know anything about
Yeah, I
the,
haven't done any looking ahead.
so I'm like everything will probably be surprising to me. But it will be interesting to see just like how she handles it. Like she's not a bad author at all. She writes really good like characterization and narrative and stuff like that. It's just interesting to see those other things pop up where I'm like, whoa. Like no wonder now I know at least where that's coming from, but it doesn't inherently make her like a writer that I don't want to read necessarily.
Hmm.
But it does make it more interesting to try to figure out how she handles other themes and like Cersei and things like that, knowing that opinion at least. Um,
Yeah.
that's interesting. That's all I can really say about that. I will say, like you brought up the Amazons. Every time I think of the Amazons, I have to bring up this story about Rick Riordan because it still cracks me up. That in Son of Neptune, which was the second Heroes of Olympus book, the first one that has Percy in it again, hence Son of Neptune.
Hmm.
They do. This book came out in like 2012, I think,
Hmm.
and back then Amazon was like much newer thing. It was still like becoming this like huge thing. It is people were starting to use it to buy books for a lot cheaper. But I remember like having to like explain to people what it was still back then and like how to use it and things like that. And so in the Son of Neptune book that I'm pretty sure came out in 2012, he has this entire storyline about with the Amazons, and they're obviously like they're the villain, one of the villain people. They're like how they're part of like the whoever the villain is in those stories in that book. And he has the Amazons running Amazon, and part of like the literal plot of the book is that they are selling everything for much cheaper than they actually should, and they're putting like other small businesses and people out of business, and they're like destroying like the environment, like the Amazon and things like that by how much like goods they're selling for a much cheaper price.
Yep.
And like I'm laughing because not only is that hilarious, like how Rick Riordan extremely makes his point known and in a very aggressive way in a children's book, and is like, "You can't stop me. I have an Aries moon. Like you can't stop me." Is um, Jeff Bezos is so upset about him writing this in a children's book that to this day, if you try to buy like that book on Audible, it is the only Rick Riordan book that you cannot buy on Audible because he refuses to sell it. Like he refuses to sell the audiobook on Audible because it's owned by Amazon. He is so mad at him for that fucking children's book. The only version of that book you find on Audible is in different languages because there's nothing in English because Jeff Bezos to this day is mad at Rick Riordan for writing a book calling him out like 15 years before most people realized what he was doing.
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
Called out the overconsumption of it too.
Yeah. I just remembered something else. I found one of those like memes we see on Instagram popped up that was just I was like, this is Rick having an Aries moon. This is like cracking me up about like him just being very aggressive about like the anti-racist sort of views. And it's from I'm pretty sure it's from the Greek gods book he wrote where it's like from Percy's perspective and he's explaining like all the different Greek myth stories.
Yeah.
I just remembered that they announced that they're putting out a new version of something like that of like all of the Percy Jackson related like monsters and stuff like that for people who are I think it's likely meant for people who have never read the books before to like understand who everybody is as they're watching the show. But this is so funny. So I had to read it. So it says he's talking about Phaethon, Phahon.
Phaethon, yeah.
And so the paragraph that the person posted, he's like, according to some versions of the story, Phaethon's little joyride also burned the people of Africa, so their skin became darker.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about that. I guess the Greeks were trying to explain why people have different skin colors. But I think it's just as likely that humans were originally dark and some god of laundry washed the Europeans with Clorox by accident and they got all bleached out. And I like read that and I was like, yeah, that's an Aries moon. Just being like, maybe we're all white on accident and the black people are what you're actually supposed to look like. Have you ever thought about that? Because they have all the melanin to protect their skin from the sun.
I like how he's like, it probably was an ideological myth, but it's still stupid.
It's still very, and that's just, I just like laughed hysterically, like reading that. And I was like, thank you, Rick, for doing that. But yeah, whenever anyone ever talks about Amazon, I just need to bring up the fact that Jeff Bezos hates Rick Riordan.
You know what? That's honestly a flex.
Oh my goodness, that's just so funny.
So I gotta get going because it's William's bedtime again. But for next week, we're gonna read more Song of Achilles. Let's see, we probably they have to put out a trailer sometime in the next week, right?
There'll be other stuff. There's other things that I thought of that we could talk about about like Titan's Curse stuff before we eventually get to reading Battle of the Labyrinth 2. We just haven't talked about it yet because other stuff has been like in the news or just popping up about things that we want to talk about. So we haven't had to. So there's always going to be something Percy related that we talk about even while we're reading Song of Achilles, and it's
Yeah.
a nice break from Song of Achilles because it's like even though it's still like trauma stuff, it's just not as like nobody's being coerced into rape in those books. So it's nice to talk about that world for a little bit while going into more serious stuff in these books.
Yeah. Well, we will see you guys next week. Hopefully more show news. I'm hoping for a trailer.
Oh, always.